Hello, folks. Welcome back. So it's Chris here once again with Madiba, Africa on today, April 27th, 2020, Freedom Day in South Africa. Join me now as we discuss events in South Africa on the anniversary of the day marking the first democratic all-race elections in South Africa in celebration of the Freedom Charter and the new South Africa, the new dispensation. Welcome aboard. I'm glad you could join me today. Hopefully we won't run into the technical difficulties that seem to be bedeviling my stream. I'm not sure what that problem is, but anyway, welcome aboard. Hopefully folks can tune in today and enjoy the conversation as we discuss Freedom Day 2020. Right, well, let me get started as people tune in and discuss the current situation with the Wuhan coronavirus, or COVID-19, as it's known by its scientific name. Around the planet at this hour, there are now over 3 million confirmed cases of COVID-19. For those who are keeping track of events, that's quite a few. We've passed the threshold of 3 million confirmed cases internationally and 207,933 confirmed deaths. Here in the United States, the figure is 965,951 confirmed cases. So we're fast approaching the 1 million threshold here in the United States. We now have 54,877 deaths attributed to the COVID-19 virus here in the U.S. Looking further afield to Africa, the numbers still remain low at this hour on this day, several weeks into this crisis. So as we look to South Africa, the current statistics are 4,546 cases with 87 confirmed fatalities. South Africa now slightly ahead of Egypt with 4,534 cases, 317 fatalities. Morocco in third with 4,115 confirmed cases, 161 fatalities, followed by Algeria at 3,382 with 425 confirmed fatalities from the COVID-19 crisis. This is something that still grips the world as we enter this new week and approach the end of April 2020. Here in Pennsylvania, we have 41,165 confirmed cases with 1,550 deaths attributed to COVID-19. I live in York County, which now is approaching 600 with 593 confirmed cases and 8 fatalities. And there you have it. That's the situation going on with the COVID-19 situation here in the United States as we speak. Well, congratulations to South Africa. Today is Freedom Day, April 27th, the day marking the first democratic all-race elections that took place in 1994 on April 27th, a day in which many of us remember quite well, with thousands and thousands of South Africans lining up to vote, many of whom it was the first time they're ever eligible to vote. Prior to this, for most of South Africa's modern history, only white South Africans and or colored or Indian at various times were permitted to vote. By and large, under the Apartheid system, which began in 1948 and continued until the end of the 1980s, as it was dismantled and finally officially put to bed with a new government in 1994. Primarily only white South Africans were permitted to vote at this stage of history. So as South Africans celebrate Freedom Day, what do we have to celebrate? Do South Africans have something, in fact, to celebrate 26 years into this? Freedom under lockdown, ICE-ZA. Yeah, it is freedom under lockdown. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what's happened to freedoms in South Africa. Not just in South Africa, but around the world, as the world deals with the Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19. Now, I listened to President Cyril Ramaphosa's address a short while ago. He did a live address earlier, and I listened to it. And while I found many things encouraging and heartening, I also found some things that were very disturbing from my perspective and bothered me greatly. He used the occasion to give a speech that's, in my view, very reminiscent of the behavior you see in Namibia and in Zimbabwe, in which they devote endless hours to venerating liberation-era heroes. And both of them have the Heroes Acre, where those who are veterans of the struggle are buried at. And while I have no issues with that, that's certainly their prerogative. In the case of South Africa, hearing the president go on and venerate the liberation-era heroes, and then also talking about Khoi and San chiefs going back hundreds of years in South Africa's history, was interesting. And it's good that he venerates them. But my question is, why were no white South Africans included in the discussion of Liberation era heroes? Just a short effort to scratch my head about some of those who contributed to trying to end apartheid, from who were not black South Africans, colored or Asian. Some names that come to mind: Dennis Goldberg, the only white MK member who was tried for terrorism. What about Helen Suzman, who spent decades in Parliament railing against and trying to end apartheid as a lone reed at times in the Parliament against it? Or Harry Schwartz, or more controversially for people today who have a short memory span, former Black Sash member and anti-apartheid activist, journalist, and the person who exposed the police murder of Steve Biko, Helen Zille. What about her? What about Brayton Breitenbach, the author and son of a minister who used the pen to fight against apartheid? Or Andre Brink, another white South African author who used the pen to show the ridiculous conduct of the apartheid state. Alan Patton, Cry of the Beloved Country, for those who don't remember. Or Byers Naud, from the pulpit, fought against apartheid. Interesting that the president spent a fair portion of his speech venerating heroes of liberation, but intentionally left all of them out. Or even inside the ANC, what of Joe Slovo? Though I'm not a fan of Joe Slovo, he's a communist, and he also was a key member of the ANC. Where's he at? Why is he not mentioned? There's a whole host of white South Africans who are members of the ANC, and I heard none of their names mentioned in venerating heroes. This sort of one-sided, slanted, biased recollection of history is distorted and unhelpful. South Africans of all stripes, of all colors, and all creeds fought against apartheid. To specifically not mention those who were true heroes who put their lives at risk and risked everything that they had to help others, simply mentioning one group of ethnic people is not helpful, I don't think, to the discussion, and does not really advance the cause of freedom in South Africa. So very disappointed to hear Cyril Ramaphosa's speech talking about that. Also, I have some concerns based on his speech here on Freedom Day. He took the occasion to talk about legitimate topics: redress, restitution, reconciliation. And he mentioned that these things have been deferred. My first question, of course, for President Cyril Ramaphosa would be, if these things are deferred, now why is that? Why are these things deferred? One single party has had absolute political control of the country for 26 years. And in fact, during most of that time, that single party has had the ability, since the current Constitution has been in effect in 1997, to amend the Constitution at any time should they choose. Knowing the reputation of Luthuli House and the ANC and how it will discipline its cadres for not following what leadership tells them, why is it that 26 years later, these things are deferred? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it, and most of them have to do with the conduct of the ANC. And so I think it's disingenuous to hear Cyril Ramaphosa, who spent many years as the deputy president under Jacob Zuma, when the country was in many ways lost and gone in the wrong direction, to hear Cyril Ramaphosa talk about things deferred. Well, things are deferred on your watch, sir. And now you've been president since the end or the early 2018, so it's over 2 years now, but you took over the ANC, which we all know matters more than the nation, the party for the ANC in your political system. You've now been in charge of that party since December of 2017. And why are these things deferred? And you can't blame this on COVID-19. No, he didn't attempt to do that, but the ANC will do that later on. They will do that later on. So you can't blame it on that. You must blame it on the people responsible. And these taglines, these racial taglines of white monopoly capital, expropriation, and restitution. Well, restitution is not a racial thing, but restitution is a different topic altogether. But these taglines are not helpful to this discourse. ICE says, hey, Justicas, yes, we should not forget that Cyril made the spontaneous comment in Parliament when he said all whites are to blame for apartheid. Yes, he did. He certainly did. And once again, I'll make the point here that Cyril Ramaphosa's memory is quite short. There would still be apartheid, arguably today. Now, some may say that the world may have turned against South Africa and that South Africans would not be able to continue apartheid. But let's talk facts here, folks. For those who are objective and want to talk about history here, I'm not a South African, so I don't have a dog in the fight. I didn't fight in the struggle. I certainly agreed with the end of apartheid, but I was not a member of the struggle, and I did not defend the apartheid state. And I'm not a South African citizen. And this is the objective reality. Umkhonto we Sizwe and the liberation movements were ineffective, ineffectual, and accomplished little beyond terrorizing people, but the level of terror wasn't sufficient that it was enough to overthrow the apartheid state. Certainly not in 1989, not in 1992, and 1994. The apartheid system, as immoral as it was, could have continued for a period of time far beyond when it did. But what is forgotten about here is that de Klerk, sensing that it was time for a change, for whatever reason he sensed there was a reason to change, and I have my own views on that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. De Klerk had a referendum, and in that referendum, those eligible to vote, which would be white South African, they put the vote to white South Africans, and 63% of white South Africans voted against apartheid. They voted to end the system of racial segregation and discrimination. 63%. Now, in any election, that's a significant majority. A significant majority. That means that only 33% of those who voted to uphold apartheid system that existed at that stage. Now, bear in mind that by 92, many of the laws, the onerous laws, had been rescinded. The past laws were gone. The anti-mixing or miscegenation laws were gone at this point. And so apartheid had already been slimmed down somewhat. But at this stage, only 33% of white South Africans who voted to retain it. So to hear Cyril Ramaphosa lie in Parliament and frankly use bigotry and racism against South Africa's white population, many of whom at this stage were not even born in 1994 and did not support apartheid. So to make the claim that all whites support apartheid is just ludicrous and insane. I've just run through a list of people who were opponents of apartheid in the modern era. None of these people are people from 120, 200, 300 years ago. They're all people in the recent past who fought against apartheid from within the system, and they fought a lonely struggle, those who did it. So to hear him say that, it's rather distressing, and it's unfortunate, and he's racialized in the debate. It's really, really, really shameful. Let's see what else we got. There's Nick. Glad you made it, Nick. ICE says, interesting how the majority ruling party is suppressing small minority groups, through the mechanism of racism, and yet arguably hardly anyone is saying anything and nothing is changing. Well, absolutely, ICE. It's funny because the African National Congress is using the pulpit of the state and speaking with bigotry on a frequent basis and also using racism to discriminate against South Africans, all in the name of, well, it was wrong before. Well, that's what we call moral equivalency. Because someone did something wrong does not make it right for you to do something wrong as well. This is the argument that the political left uses the world over and constantly happens. On my posts on LinkedIn, when I mention news articles and offer commentary on them, so many times I'll hear things, I'll say something about South Africa, I'll say something in Uganda or in Kenya that's taking place and make a legitimate argument about why it's wrong, only to have someone come back, usually a leftist and oftentimes an African, but not just Africans, also Europeans or Americans, and say, yes, but the United States did this. Okay, how is that germane to the conversation? I'm not talking about the United States. If you want to talk about the United States, we'll have a conversation about the United States. This particular article that I've commented on is about Kenya or it's about Nigeria. It's not about the United States. And so the problem is that so many people attach moral value to everything that someone says, everything someone does. This is a hazardous place to be in life. If everything that you make a decision on is based entirely on assuming the moral values that the person making the statement has, then you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation throughout life. For those who are paying attention, I am wearing the Madiba Rugby Sevens jersey, a limited edition, hard to come by, South African Springboks or Blitzboks Rugby Sevens jersey. This was in honor of Nelson Mandela's birthday a couple years ago. Pretty cool stuff, hard to come by. And behind me on the map, you see to this side, the scarf for South Africa in the 2011 Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. And on the other side, you see a scarf from the FIFA World Cup in 2010. A World Cup, the only one I've ever attended other than the Women's World Cup. I was in South Africa. I was at Loftus to see Cameroon play against Denmark. And then I saw US and Ghana in Rustenburg, which at Royal Bafokeng, which was an amazing event. Fantastic, great crowd. We lost because we didn't have a decent striker. Josie Altidore was young and foolish at that time. Anyway, not a fan of that game, but nonetheless, I went to the Rugby World Cup. So there you have it. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Let's see what else we got here. Christoph says, a gift horse comes to mind when we're talking about views of many and some. Yeah, well, it's interesting you should mention that. So I have an article here from the Daily Maverick by a gentleman named Yanga Sibembe. And Yanga Sibembe talks about that. And his comment is, when people throng to vote for the first time, well, this would be those who were not previously allowed to vote. So once again, thinking only of a segment of South African society, not all of South African society. But when people thronged to vote for the first time back in 1994, what were they expecting? What were their realistic expectations of what was going to happen? And this is something I cautioned South Africa and South Africans and those who had listened to me as a young man in 1994. I said, listen, you have to be patient. This will take a long time, a long time. You have a couple of generations of South Africans who spent the better part of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s not getting an education either because of the poor Bantu education system or because the only means of protesting against the apartheid state was to not go to school and go in the streets and dance and protest and just avoid the state altogether. This was particularly so the case in the mid-1980s when the state tried to once again reimpose Afrikaans as the median language for instruction in all public schools. And when that happened, kids just went to the streets and refused to go to school. So you have kids who are not literate and grow up and become adults, and their value to society is limited as a consequence. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's going to take a long time to get next generations of South Africans, Black South African children in particular, proper educations so that they can become productive members of society, go on to trade schools, go on to university, and to become entrepreneurs. But you have to have proper education. And rather than fixing the Bantu education system, the ANC got off to a good start trying to fix it. But today we have a dilapidated education system and the public school system is a disaster. Cyril Ramaphosa is correct. The dream has been deferred, but it's been deferred by you, my friend, your party, which found it far more important to spend money on arms, Type 209 diesel submarines, which South Africa doesn't need, cruisers from Germany, 3 of them, which you don't need and you can't operate, Gripen fighters from Sweden, and the Hawk lead-in fighters, among other things. If you were concerned about the military readiness, you should have devoted money to the Army, the South African Army, which has been habitually neglected since 1994 and has ancient trucks, ancient barracks, and dilapidated facilities and can barely train its personnel, not to mention aging workforce because of your employment policies for the South African military. So that's where the focus should have been, not buying arms, not buying $7.1 billion worth of defense materiel. What a waste of resources that could have been devoted elsewhere. South Africa faces no external threats to its sovereignty from its neighbors and has not since the end of apartheid. So pouring that money into that place is just not wise. But what about the millions, the tens of millions wasted by Jacob Zuma illegally building his personal residence in KwaZulu-Natal, in Kandla? What about that? What about Travelgate? The misuse of government funds and flying around on executive jets by government officials who are not entitled to it. Or the coterie of cabinet positions created, 65 under Jacob Zuma. It's just absolutely insane to see how much money the ANC has frittered away. Don't even get me started talking about state capture, but beyond that, what about the parastatals, Eskom, Transnet, South African Airways? The list goes on and on. State-owned enterprises that are poorly run that somehow made money under apartheid, even though they were still state-owned enterprises. Under apartheid restrictions and sanctions, they managed to be profitable, Sasol. And now these organizations are absolute disasters for the most part. There are some exceptions, and they have failed the country. So the dream deferred, my friend, is not simply a consequence of apartheid or racism. Certainly plays a role, and certainly as Yanga Sibembe mentions in his article, that it put most white South Africans far ahead from a baseline starting out. Hey, Jacques, welcome aboard. But it is not simply apartheid or racism. And let's quit talking about white people as if white people are all the same. The South African white community is also quite diverse, much like the South African black community. You have many different ethnic groups amongst the black South African population and the same in the white South African population. People look at South Africa as being divided between Afrikaners and English speakers. Well, that's true. But within those groups, there are other divisions. You have over 400,000 ethnic Portuguese who live in South Africa. You have a division amongst those who speak English in the English-speaking community. They're not all from England or the United Kingdom. There are people who've immigrated to South Africa from other places and adopted English as their language, or they were already speaking English when they came there. So it's not quite as simple as people make it out to be. And to hear Cyril Ramaphosa say all white people support apartheid, that's just shameful. And that's distorting history and being dishonest. So let's see what else we got over here. Comments. I still have the stamp in my ID book for voting in that march. That's cool, Nicholas. Yeah, that was a momentous day, no matter where you sat on the political spectrum, April 27th, 1994. I think 2 years ago, education minister failed to deliver textbooks to needy schools. until April, May that year. Yeah, it wasn't just that, Nicholas. There's also the case of these black economic empowerment firms, majority-owned businesses that are just fictional and they're just a business on paper. And what happens is they're awarded tenders, and most famously, this has happened in the last decade a couple times in the Eastern Cape, in which these companies are given millions of rands of contracts to deliver textbooks to primary schools in the Eastern Cape. And of course, there are no textbooks, and of course, there are no prosecutions, and of course, there's no comment about it by many except a few in the press. Thank goodness for organizations like Carte Blanche, and it used to be, I'd say, the Mail and Guardian, but it has become a much more politically oriented publication, the Mail and Guardian, than it was, say, 10 years ago, which is rather sad and unfortunate. 10 years ago, the Mail and Guardian was still upholding the government to its standards. Today, it does at times when it picks and chooses, which is unfortunate. I don't know what happened to the Mail and Guardian. So let me make a few points here on this day. So first off, June 25th, June 26th, 1955, adopted at the Congress of the People in Kliptown, Johannesburg, the Freedom Charter from 1955. This is the founding basis document from the 1950s in which many in the liberation struggle sought to change South Africa. And let me just read a few lines from it so that I make this clear. And notice that it doesn't say black, it doesn't say white, it doesn't say Asians. Got to go get some food. Okay, come back. It doesn't say black, white, Asian, colored. It says we the people. So this is the Freedom Charter, similar to the United States Declaration of Independence, a bit more extensive than ours in some respects. But we, the people of South Africa, declare for all our country and the world to know that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and that no government can justify claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people. That our people have been robbed of their birthright to land, liberty, and peace by a form of government founded on injustice and equality. That our country will never be prosperous or free until all people live in brotherhood, enjoying equal rights and opportunities. That only a democratic state based on the will of all the people can secure to all their birthright without distinction of color, race, sex, or belief. Well, absolutely. Those are fantastic words, and I agree wholeheartedly with the Freedom Charter from 1955. It's unfortunate that the ANC, of course, likes to take credit for this. They were a part of the Congress of the People. And of course, the Congress of the People was not the current COPE political party, which is really just a group of Mbeki supporters who were angry at the ANC, and so they broke away. But the original COPE, which included an amalgam of a lot of groups who were fighting to end apartheid. Bear in mind that apartheid only began as an official state-sanctioned policy in 1948, with the ascension of the National Party, its massive victory in 1948, in which it took control of the country. So here we are just 7 years later, and this declaration is made against the government. And this talks about self-determination and rights and equal pay and that sort of thing. Some very egalitarian and libertarian, not libertarian, but liberal positions. So that's the Freedom Charter from 1955. And it is the basis of the 1996-97 Constitution. It played a large role in creating the Constitution. Arguably one of the most liberal constitutions in the world South Africa has. A very lengthy constitution guaranteeing lots of rights, including rights to gay rights are included in there, which is something that few constitutions bother to consider. So nonetheless, let's see what else we have here. So Christoph says, we would think that the new forms of education via technology internet would be a positive, but Mr. Malema already in his speech today used this as new discrimination. Well, it's not just Malema, but also the president talked about it. You listen to Cyril Ramaphosa talk about, and this was a direct target at white South Africans, and you can't read this any other way. But the irony is it's not just white South Africans that it affects. But he was talking about, while some South Africans sit comfortably in their homes, their fridges stocked full of food, access to the internet, and their children still able to be educated via the internet, others live in misery. Well, he's right. But those who live in those conditions aren't simply white South Africans, and it's certainly not all South Africans. Are you not aware of the white South Africans that are living in camps and living in tin shacks, informal settlements in Gauteng? Yeah, that happens. And we're not talking about 2 or 3 whites. We're talking about tens of thousands of white South Africans. But those black, white, colored Indian South Africans who are living in abject poverty are suffering immensely. But Cyril Ramaphosa set this up and presented it as if only rich whites. And that's simply not the case. His children aren't suffering. Tokyo Sexwale's kids aren't suffering. Tokyo Sexwale's not suffering. And none of the cadres are suffering. They all have their bite of the pie. So there you have it. It's Cyril Ramaphosa himself, not just Julius Malema, that's pushing this ethnic narrative. Yes, the reality is the vast majority of those people of color are suffering. But they're suffering before COVID-19. And they're suffering because of a legacy of apartheid, but not exclusively a legacy of apartheid. They're suffering because of macroeconomic policies. And Cyril Ramaphosa doubled down on that today in his address to the nation. He talked about redress, restitution, and reconciliation. Well, yeah, there are questions about reconciliation. There's an article in Al Jazeera today talking about F.W. de Klerk and how the country never prosecuted the apartheid era crimes. Well, there's a small problem with that. And this is the problem I have with that. This is what happens is that the reason that people who do things that are wrong when they're in power refuse to leave power is because they fear prosecution and they fear the overturning of a system they've set up. And so when you put disincentives into getting people to leave and to voluntarily turn over control, you get a mess. Hey, Sean, welcome. So for instance, let me give you an example. Augustino Pinochet was the leader of Chile. And after he gave up control of the country, negotiated away, gave it away, he kept himself a seat for life as a senator so that he could never be prosecuted. And as a former head of state, he wasn't able to be prosecuted for those actions under his term. However, he was convicted, or indicted, I should say, indicted by a Spanish court for crimes against Spanish citizens and against Chileans. I don't know what authority they think they have over Chileans, but nonetheless, they did it. So they issued an arrest warrant for him, and the United Kingdom famously detained and arrested Augustino Pinochet when he was in the UK on a trip to Europe. Now, you'll never get someone who's doing something wrong to leave if you simply are looking for revenge or settlement. Now, I understand that this is not exactly a fair measure of justice in many people's minds, but let me explain. So in Liberia, Charles Taylor refused to leave and end the bloody conflict, which ended immediately when he left, by the way, to leave unless he was guaranteed that he'd be okay. So the U.S. and Nigeria promised him safe refuge haven in Nigeria. He left the country. The civil war ended. Liberia began its long tortured return to normalcy, which it still hasn't achieved, but it began that after Charles Taylor left. But Charles Taylor was guaranteed that he'd be okay in Nigeria. Well, he went to Nigeria, and then a little bit of subterfuge between Americans and the Nigerians, giving him the impression that he was about to be arrested and be indicted and taken to The Hague for the International Criminal Court. So he attempted to flee to Cameroon, and they used that as a pretext to arrest him. And so Charles Taylor was taken there. So now you've arrested Taylor. You've arrested Pinochet, former heads of state, and also the former head of Chad. You try to get him, but he got asylum in South Africa. My point is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was set up in South Africa, the TRC, to address these issues. Now, it is fair to say that many apartheid state operatives, particularly in the police and intelligence services, did not step forward and confess their crimes to settle the record. Okay, well, they're eligible for prosecution, and the government can prosecute them if they didn't step forward. So the Truth and Reconciliation is not the thing to blame for not getting reconciliation in South Africa. And also, the people who are involved in this and committed these activities, these crimes, were a small minority of people in the country, and particularly a small minority of the white population. So blaming all white South Africans or attributing these crimes to them is shameful and disgraceful, and it has nothing to do with reconciliation. It has everything to do with dividing people, and that is not helpful. Certainly, you can prosecute people for the crimes that they committed under apartheid if they did not step forward under the TRC, but that is the ANC's responsibility. It's been the government in power since 1994, the government record. Let's see what else. Ray Charles can see what the agenda. They're pushing 5G and much more vast control grid. Yep. The abject poverty is a result of a job well done by ANCers who've had over a generation to turn things around. Well, I'd say when it comes to leadership, it's 2 generations. Generationally for human beings, it's a generation. Yep. ANC is doing exactly what it's designed to do, rob the coffers and turn everyone against it. Jacques, well, it's hard to argue that point. You know, it's interesting. The ANC is achieving exactly what the ANC wants, control and political power, which gives it access to the levers. But the problem is that they're destroying the golden goose. And it's shameful because ostensibly there was supposed to be a liberation movement for all. And here we are 26 years later, and I'm not really seeing the benefit of ANC leadership or rule in South Africa. There was a good start early on. If you look back at 1994, only 33% of South Africans had access to electricity in their homes, 33%. Today, that's dramatically changed. About 86% of South Africans have electricity to their homes, whatever sort of home they have. A large number of South Africans didn't have access to plumbing. It was down for Black South Africans to as low as indoor plumbing to as low as 10-15% for many Black South Africans living in informal settlements or traditional homes, and that's unfortunate. It really is something that needed attention, and I will give ANC some credit. It was slow in getting started, and it took some time, but they did achieve what they promised the '94 elections: 1 million homes in 5 years, but it wasn't 5 years, it's closer to 8 years. But they did build 1 million homes, and they did get electricity delivered to an awful lot of people. But the short-sighted leadership of those leading South Africa did not pay attention to the greater need. When you take 2/3 of the population that's not on the grid and not paying for electricity, you extend the grid to them, and then majority of those folks aren't paying for electricity when they should be paying for it, and you don't force people to pay for electricity, you hinder the grid and the state utility that provides electricity from getting revenue that it needs for services it's providing. But beyond that, you exponentially increase the consumption of electricity in the country. And rather than focus long-term development of additional power plants and expanding the power grid supply, the ANC ignored that for the most part. In fact, at some stage was shutting down coal-fired power plants so they could reduce carbon emissions rather than worrying about getting the charcoal carbon out of people's homes that they're burning so they can cook and heat with, and getting upper respiratory disease as a consequence. More concerned about the ozone and the carbon dioxide emissions that the global climate change crowd is concerned about. So the ANC, instead of delivering more power, delivered less. And we have had over a decade now of electricity hampering the growth of South Africa's economy and leaving many people living in misery. Not to mention putting many people at risk. This is something that when you live at home and you rely on some sort of device to keep yourself alive and you lose power, what happens then? It's really distressing. But the ANC has really not gotten it right. Really not gotten it right. So let me go back to Yanga Sibembe's article in the Daily Maverick. And he says, Freedom Day, we have a long way to go to be truly free. He said that during apartheid, there were instances of black and white people doing the same job, but because whites were superior, quotes, under the system, it was an insult for them to earn the same as their black counterparts. This is true. A lot of folks were working similar jobs under apartheid and received different salaries. And that was part of the Freedom Charter arguing for equal pay for equal work. Well, it's been 26 years. South Africa has control of its wages, does it not? The ANC. So what's the deal here? Well, he makes a point. He says that these differences meant that even when apartheid ended, the starting point was not the same. White people were years ahead of other races. Yes, the vast majority of white South Africans were light years ahead of the rest of the country, much of the rest of the country. But instead of addressing the country as a whole, the ANC has spent the past 26 years enriching itself and its cadres and awarding contracts to its crony corrupt friends and creating a system of racial segregation known as BEE, which discriminates against people based on their skin pigmentation and preventing them from getting government tenders by awarding it to majority-owned firms. And what they've done is they've eviscerated the potential for entrepreneurialism in South Africa and disheartened many people because they make it so difficult for people to succeed of all races. No one benefits when the government awards a government tender to an inexperienced or non-existent company to deliver goods and services for the government or on behalf of the government and then never does it or delivers substandard services. That doesn't help anyone. I don't understand how anybody in their right mind. Now, before anyone says, I don't think anyone in this crowd is going to say it, but before anyone says, well, Wyatt, in America, you have preferential awarding of federal contracts. We do. And I don't agree with it. So, and I'm a beneficiary of it. Wait a second. You're an old white guy. How can you be a beneficiary of government preferences? Well, our government at the federal level provides preferential treatment for minorities, women. So now that's the majority of the country, women and minorities, if you throw them together. Minorities, women, and veterans, and disabled veterans. And I qualify under that category. So if I were to seek a tender, a contract with the U.S. government, I would get preferential points based on that. Now, I'm grateful. That would help me potentially get some business for my consultancy, but it's not fair and it's not right, and I disagree with it. Now, the idea is to, in the veterans' case, is to give an advantage to thank those or to reward them for the service they've given. So I appreciate and understand that. But my service as a soldier doesn't make me any better than any other American. It doesn't make you better than another man, another woman, another straight, another gay, another black, white, Asian, Pacific Islander, whatever. I'm just another American, and I should be able to win or lose a contract on the merits of what I can offer. That should be the basis for it. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And in South Africa, so many South Africans I know who own minority-owned businesses find it impossible to win tenders with the government because of BEE. And this is a disaster, an absolute disaster. It's really a mess. What the ANC has managed to accomplish in its 26 years, some things are laudable, delivering electricity, plumbing, improving some schools, but lowering the standards of all schools across the board, but improving some schools. And also, there's not been a civil conflict. There's not been war. These are all accomplishments, I would argue, on the part. But not to mention, South Africa's diplomacy abroad at times has been intruding, but other times has been helpful. So, I mean, Mandela's efforts in Cote d'Ivoire really just got in the way and didn't help. But in Burundi, it made a difference. In the DRC, the SANDF's conduct there has been at times reprehensible and criminal, at other times successful. But in other places, like in the Ethiopian Eritrea, the South African contribution to peacekeeping has been essential in peacemaking. So, it's a mixed bag. But what the ANC has accomplished, without a doubt, in its 26 years, it is encouraged, intentionally or otherwise, and I think it's unintentional, but it's the end result. It has encouraged young South Africans to see the path to success, not as the path to success that most people around the world would look. So when children are small, they aspire to be a fireman or a policeman or a doctor or a dentist, maybe a lawyer or a sports player, something like that, an icon. You want to play soccer, football, you want to play rugby, you want to play hockey, something like that. Children aspire to do something that contributes to society. But what many children, particularly those who grow up in ANC-oriented families, aspire to be is a cadre, to be a member of the party, to be a local ward councillor, to be a provincial MEP, to be a member of parliament. Why would someone aspire to be part of a political system? Well, because the ANC has made it clear, intentionally or otherwise, that the way to wealth, success, popularity, and true freedom is to be a political actor. And to be a political actor, you get your hands on the keys to the kingdom. So you get to be the person who decides and awards the tenders on contracts. And of course, that means you can dip your hand into the pocket of the tender and get your baksheesh, your corruption from it. So this is truly one of the great shames and tragedies of South Africa. 26 years after we start the path of the new South Africa, so many young South Africans don't want to be doctors, lawyers, and contribute to society and play a role. They would much rather be politicians, to be parasites, to feed off of the body politic, to feed off of people, to get their cut. And that's disgraceful. Now, that happens all over the world, but to the degree that it happens in South Africa, no. It is beyond the pale the number of young South Africans who see their path. Now, it's common in Africa, but see their path to success as being a politician. Very unfortunate. Let's see what else we got over here. So Nicholas says, when fuel price adjustments are announced on a monthly basis due to the verifying exchange rate, diesel, petrol are listed, the latter used to cook and light poor shacks. Yeah, illuminating paraffin, absolutely. That's used, kerosene used to cook with and to heat shacks. Well, I've got a whole problem with that because I have an issue with price controls on fuel. Right now, what I noticed in Southern Africa, in Botswana, and in South Africa with the government setting the price of petrol is that whenever the price of petrol went up, the government adjusting the price upwards happened rather quickly. But when petrol prices dropped, there was a lagging effect. It took far longer for the government to lower the price of petrol at the pump. Why is that? Because the money's being made, the difference, and the consumer's paying the price. So it should be market driven. So I have a real issue with that. Let's see what else. BE is crushing our economy, and I'm one of the people who had no hand in apartheid but paid the price nonetheless. On many occasions, I always land on my feet, but many are not as lucky. Jacques, it's a great point. What I often recommend to minority or white South Africans in particular, but not just whites, but Indians as well and others who find themselves being abused by BE laws, is that I understand that the South African government plays such a large role in the economic sector in South Africa and that many people want to turn to it for contracts. I got that, appreciate it. But the reality is that it's not going to happen until that law is rescinded and changed. And even then, there'll be subtle ways to keep people from getting business because they'll just discriminate against you. And you'll have to take them to court and spend a lot of money, and you may not win. So what you have to do is find your marketplace amongst businesses or the business sector or consumers and target them. And that's what you have to do. Now, beyond that, you need to go inside of SACU, the Southern African Customs Union, the extension of South Africa's economy in Namibia, Botswana, Swaziland, and Lesotho, especially in Botswana and Namibia. Small markets, but places you can get a foothold and make success and make a profit by delivering a service and or a good. So look at that. And then if you have success and you start to grow revenue and you can do something beyond that, you need to be more venturesome and look at things like Rwanda or Mauritius, depending on your market sector. You're not going to go into Mauritius and do banking or textiles. That market is saturated. But there are other things you can do there. You can go into Rwanda and do pretty much anything short of telecoms. That market's pretty saturated. But Rwanda is a fascinating market, and it is very business friendly. It's not alone. There are other opportunities out there in Africa. But my suggestion is to minority-owned businesses in South Africa that you have to look abroad as well. You can't simply look in South Africa because for now, your government is race-based discrimination against minorities. That's just the reality, folks. Now, the ANC can paint it any way they want. They can apologize and say it's a way to fix the past. It's not. It doesn't fix the past. It perpetuates the past, but turns it upside down. So instead of discriminating against the majority, now you discriminate against the minority, and you've achieved nothing. Again, folks, I refer to the Freedom Charter of 1955. It doesn't discriminate against white and black South Africans. We're all the same. So why aren't we the same under the ANC? And blaming apartheid is not the answer. It's wrong. Let's see what else. Jacques. BE is, however, not only about tenders and contracts, it carries. Yeah, Christoph, you're correct. And I am selling it short. It does carry across. It's similar to the argument that Zimbabweans make about the sanctions against Zimbabwe. First off, there are no sanctions by the United States against Zimbabwe. There are travel restrictions and investment restrictions and cash transfer restrictions against about 175 members of ZANU-PF and state-owned enterprises, a handful of state-owned enterprises, which are known to be money laundering or funneling efforts for getting money to those people. And so there are restrictions against them. And some Zimbabweans complain that those are sanctions because when they, as private business people, try to do business in the West, say in the United States, anytime they approach someone, they have a difficulty having success because they're often told, well, there's sanctions against Zimbabwe. Well, there aren't. There simply aren't. And the fact that a business person in America is stupid or ignorant about that, that's unfortunate, and that's something the U.S. government should spend more time clarifying the position. So there are no sanctions in Zimbabwe, but the restrictions do have a larger effect and a broader effect than those simply directly affected by it. And by the same token, you're correct. BE does have an effect. People, say majority-owned businesses will try to avoid getting contracts with minority-owned businesses at times. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. It needs to be rescinded. It's racist and it's wrong. And the fact that the world doesn't see it, the world doesn't speak up and say anything, they are morally wrong. And it's very funny. We had all these people who would stand up and morally oppose apartheid, but now when a majority government does the exact same thing in many fashions, we hear lots of arguments. And I'm sick of hearing these arguments. People are people. Nobody's different. Nobody's better than anyone else. We're all born in a similar fashion, either naturally or through cesarean. We're all born in a similar fashion. And we all leave this planet in a similar way, and no one is better than anyone else. Some of us are some are brighter, some are dumber, some are better looking, some are not as attractive, but we're all endowed with our Creator with certain capacities and certain capabilities. Simply being Muslim, Christian, animist, Buddhist, Taoist, or being black, white, colored, Asian, purple, green, blue, that is not what makes us who we are. That is a part of who we are. And the content of our character, as Martin Luther King said, is what matters, the content of our character. And the South African government passing racist laws or race-based laws to advantage one group over another are simply doing exactly the thing that they argued that they were fighting against for decades. And the fact that they can't see that irony says an awful lot about the leadership of the African National Congress. Now, I don't paint the entire African National Congress as being racist. Most people in that party aren't. Many of them are multi-party, multiracial, committed South Africans who truly care about South Africa. But the actions of the party speak volumes for the party itself. Anyway, so Nicholas says, can't argue we must be the only country in the world pushing affirmative action in favor of the majority. Yeah, it is ludicrous, isn't it, to realize that South Africa has laws that are designed to preferentially treat the majority. Normally, people make preferences for obscure groups, minority groups, or for oligarchies, things like that. It is quite unusual to see it go in the opposite direction. Strange. Starbucks. Yeah, so back to Cyril Ramaphosa in today's address to the nation on what should be it'll be a moot a muted day, a quiet day, because of COVID-19, the Wuhan coronavirus, in case anyone didn't know where it came from. But it may be a quiet day and people can't celebrate in normal fashions because public assemblies are banned in South Africa under the Emergency Powers Act. Um, it may be a day like that. But Sir Ramaphosa, in his address to the nation, talked about the dream deferred, and including that, he talked about land, healthcare, a change. We need to change a pace here. We need to change this up. This is very chilling to hear this. Rather than abandon the myth and lies about land and the abject failure of the ANC to address land properly, or to be honest about the positive changes they've made over the past 26 years when it comes to land, rather than address that, they continue to play this populist game, and to hear the term colonialism thrown in there so many times, or colonist, in his speech is very disturbing and chilling in my book. And it also speaks to someone who doesn't care about a multiracial democratic South Africa. Cyril Ramaphosa, to me, is just playing the role of a politician who says what he needs to say to get ahead. And that's unfortunate. Truly, truly sad. He said freedom for some is freedom for none. And I agree with that. Great catch line. Freedom for some is freedom for none. And what we're really talking about here is political freedom exists in South Africa, although not under COVID-19. We got that. Okay, but that's not just South Africa. A lot of us are suffering the loss of our civil liberties, some of it warranted under the conditions, but some of it beyond the pale. So we don't have political freedom at the moment, but true freedom comes with economic freedom. Now, economic freedom could have been addressed had South Africa followed the path that I recommend. Instead of taking large multinational South African corporations and threatening them that they would nationalize them unless they gave stakes, equity stakes, to select members of the ANC like Tokyo Sexwale, Cyril Ramaphosa, and a large number of others, instead of taking those stakes and giving it to them to make them multimillionaires and in some cases billionaires eventually, those equity stakes should have gone into a national sovereign wealth fund. The National Sovereign Wealth Fund could have spun off dividend payments and capital gains payments to South Africans, adult South Africans, based on their citizenship, and then beyond that, paid out an amount to those South Africans who had economic need. Now, is that fair? No, it's progressive, but to right the historical inequities, it's somewhat necessary. And while not a progressive, I would have been in favor of that sort of system. So a national sovereign wealth fund in which everyone is a stakeholder, everyone who's an adult in South Africa and a citizen has a share. You get a monthly statement. It says, this is your portion of it, and this is what the fund has done for South Africa. This month, we paid out this many million rand, and it went to people below this income level. So if you made less than 5,000 rand per month, you got this much payment. And then you build an ownership society, not a welfare society. That's the first step. The second step, well, that's actually not the first step. The first step would have been to fix policing. So we had community-based policing, not simply cops driving by in cars, those who actually have a car. Fix the law enforcement, make South Africa a safe place to live and work in, and get real law enforcement. That's the first step. Not putting political cadres in charge like Jackie Salibe, a disgusting criminal, who should never have been in charge of the South African Police Service, and a whole host of other cadres who are just disgraceful. Law enforcement, make the place safe. That will attract foreign direct investment and give South Africans an opportunity to spend more of their time and wealth on themselves and their family and their work and their employees rather than building fences and walls to protect themselves. Fix the police, National Sovereign Wealth Fund, and the third step is to fix education. And had we fixed education in 1994 to 2000, you would have generations of South African students graduating today who could achieve a matrix score of 70%, not 40%, and be considered a graduate. And instead of having just 13 and 19% of South Africans actually graduate high school, even with the lower standards, you will be graduating 70 to 90% of South Africans from school with proper educations, able to function in the workforce, literate in their first language and literate in English as well, and or Afrikaans, although I don't think Afrikaans would have made it, but certainly in English. And since it's lingua franca around the world, English would have been the right one. But instead, we have a very different situation. We have an ANC blaming apartheid and racism and blaming all white South Africans for its failures, Now, those failures, as I said, are not solely attributable to the ANC's conduct, but its policies are a large measure of what's going on. Let's see, Variable Vision says, it seems the ANC is wrecking the economy on purpose under the veil of saving lives under lockdown. The theory is being passed around that they intend to replace private industry with state-run enterprises. Well, I, you know, the only reason I can see that the ANC would want to do that is more control and more patronage, and they're just seeing things the wrong way. I don't understand. There are genuine, successful, talented, intelligent, idea-based Black South Africans who've come up with ideas, developed companies, not simply because they were handed stakes, but done it from scratch, whether it's restaurants or IT companies or service companies. There are plenty of Black South Africans, despite the failures that have happened in the country, that have made it on their own, in spite of the ANC. And the ANC doubling down on this Marxist state control of the means of production, it's just going to be an utter disaster. They will chase a fair portion of the remaining white population out of the country, a portion of the colored and Indian population, which will go to the UK or to East Africa or elsewhere, Australia, New Zealand, somewhere like that, where people can have an opportunity to do things that aren't based on race or the state controlling everything. It's really unfortunate. I don't know if the ANC is doing this intentionally. Like Ronaldo Hose, I kind of think the ANC in many respects is simply incompetent in a lot of what it does. This is the problem. It simply cannot get things done. But it's very disturbing when the president gets up and he gives a national speech and he talks about reconciliation and liberation heroes, and not one white South African is mentioned as a liberation hero. And I've run through a list here. I made a list for those who tuned in later. So here are some white South Africans in recent history who contributed to the liberation struggle to end apartheid. These aren't historical figures from 1,000 years ago. These are people recently. Not a single one of them I heard mentioned by Cyril Ramaphosa. Dennis Goldberg, a member of MK, Mkhonto we Sizwe, a terrorist group, a group I don't agree with, but nonetheless, he did contribute to the liberation struggle. Helen Suzman, member of parliament for decades, a lone reed in parliament, arguing and railing against apartheid and drawing the world's attention to the apartheid system in South Africa. Harry Schwartz, another member of parliament for decades, opposition to apartheid. Helen Zille, a member of the Black Sash, a journalist whose life was at risk, who exposed the police murder of Steve Biko, and who fought to end apartheid, yet has been abused endlessly by the ANC since the end of apartheid. Now, had she joined the ANC, she'd be regaled. She probably would have been a minister of this, a minister of that, like Barbara Hogan and a host of other white South Africans who are in the ANC, many of whom are not particularly competent at what they're doing, but they're still there in the ANC. But Helen Zille has been vilified and misrepresented by the press and by the ANC in particular, and especially the EFF. She's an anti-apartheid hero. Yet we don't hear about it. Brayton Breitenbach, an author who made a tremendous impact. Those outside the country learned a lot about apartheid from his writings. One of them. Andre Brink, another South African writer who contributed immensely to helping the world be aware of what was happening under apartheid. Alan Paton, or Byers Neld. These are all white South Africans and heroes of the liberation struggle. Yet not a single one of them was worthy of mention by Cyril Ramaphosa, a president who talks about redress, restitution, and reconciliation. Well, where's the reconciliation when you whitewash history and remove people from it? It reminds me of my trip to the Apartheid Museum at Gold Reef City in Johannesburg, in Soweto. And I've gone through the museum a few times, and each time I've gone through the museum, it seems to become less and less an anti-apartheid museum or apartheid museum, and more a woohoo, ANC, yay, we saved the country, we liberated South Africa. That's what it seems to be more and more, less and less about and the apartheid, more and more about praising the ANC. I found it comical a few years ago, the ANC took credit for the Black consciousness movement, which Steve Biko is the person responsible for that, and he was not doing that with the ANC. They take credit for everything that happened in South Africa and the struggle as if they were the only liberation group involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. They were but one of many. Anyway, so I find it very distressing to hear them say that. So let's see what else we got here. One of the theories. Let he who is deceived be deceived. A Roman maxim. Other theories go that they want to push the door so far that they naturally do what they want while being able to wash their hands of international laws. Yeah, Christoph, that may in fact be what's going on. The ANC is going to maybe allowing things to fail so that they can do whatever they want. I really think, though, it has a lot less to do with that and more to do with incompetence. But there's also a revenge factor by many members of the ANC. You've seen some members of the ANC who have abandoned the ANC, particularly with the nonsense that was taking place in the buildup prior to the previous municipal elections in Nelson Mandela Bay, and the cronyism, corruption, and wholesale theft of state resources and failure of the ANC in the Nelson Mandela Bay metro area. So they brought in Mr. FIFA himself, Danny Jordan, a corrupt sports guy who organized the FIFA World Cup in 2010. He was brought in to be the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, in part because he's colored and there's a large colored base in Nelson Mandela Bay, but also he was seen as a guy that could fix things. So Nelson Mandela Bay was the ANC brought them in and then still lost control of the municipality to the DA, which took a plurality of votes with 45% of the vote, but not enough to have a majority to rule outright. So it had to go into coalition, which of course was perpetually undermined by the coalition partners, and eventually it collapsed. And now the ANC rules Nelson Mandela Bay again. Yeah, so maybe a situation like that, but I think that really a lot of it's incompetence. Let's see what else. Afrikaans schools outperform English language schools every year because of a culture of respect and spiritual development of learners. Tercia Basson. Yeah, I think there's some fair statements there. Afrikaans medium schools, oftentimes private schools we're talking about, oftentimes religion plays a role, kind of like Catholic schools, and religion plays a role in the curriculum and or in the conduct of the students. They're held to conduct that's appropriate, and that definitely does play a role in the performance of students. Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think it's a question of whether it's English or Afrikaans, but more the Afrikaans community. This is a larger role, the role of religion and moral respect and things like that. All right, so let's see what else. Nicholas says, who was the white lady in the black sash that died in a contrived car crash? Yeah. I don't recall her name. I'll have to look that up, but yes, yeah. Well, it's interesting you say contrived car crash. That's not as common in South Africa, but in Zimbabwe, since the end of UDI, since it's become Zimbabwe, especially in the 80s and 90s, but the common way that people were eliminated and assassinated was through traffic accidents. And in fact, now this one was argued at first, but it wasn't true. Morgan Tsvangirai wife died in a horrific traffic accident in Zimbabwe, and people, because this is so common in Zimbabwe, people immediately thought this was an assassination attempt. As the opposition leader, his wife died. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt, as I understand it. He survived, but it turns out that the vehicle involved was actually a vehicle that was funded by our government, USAID, our development agency, helping. And they were doing medical work in Zimbabwe, and it was not a state-sponsored assassination. But yeah, contrived car crashes are common. And in a place where road safety is always not the best, it's an easy way to eliminate a political opponent. Let's see what else. Martin Mull says, do you see a massive increase in unrest? Yeah, I got to tell you, Martin, I'm gravely concerned about the majority of South Africa's population who are not living in formal housing, and the conditions they're living under and how long this continue. This level 5 to level 4 is not going to be enough. Simply letting people have cigarettes is not going to be enough. Alcohol, while I understand the social ills tied to it, certainly allowing alcohol would have an impact that could be beneficial in relieving some of the stress. But anyway, it's a really tough situation. And yeah, I do expect to see at some point, the longer this goes, the higher the likelihood that the unrest is going to happen. For South Africans, black South Africans in particular, who grew up under apartheid, it must be very distressing for them to see their civil liberties constrained like this. They may be understanding, but it's got to be distressing. And also seeing the police and the military out patrolling townships and the streets, carrying weapons and riding around in armored vehicles, buffaloes, Caspers, Rattels, whatever they're riding around in, probably buffaloes and Caspers. This must bring back very painful memories and very difficult time in South Africa's history. And I can certainly understand how a lot of South Africans would be very distressed by that. It's really, really got to be something that's got people on edge. A lot of South Africans have to be asking themselves at this stage, will I ever work again? Seriously, am I ever going to be able to go back to work? Certainly in the informal sector, this is going to be a problem. Now, for the guys who wipe down your windscreen outside the mall, they'll be able to get back to work, assuming they've survived and not starved to death, and get food parcels or manage to get by on what income they have. But a lot of people in the informal sector who do things like maybe they plait hair or they run a hair salon, an informal one, they may not be able to get back to work. And the informal sector is a big part of the economy, often overlooked and often understated in South Africa. In much of Africa, and especially in West Africa, it represents 80% of all employment is in the informal sector. It's just astounding. We look at South Africa's unemployment rate, which at the end of apartheid was somewhere between 20 and 29%, depending on whose statistics you use. But let's just go with the figure of 25%. 1 in 4 South Africans who were employable in the workforce were not working. What do we have today? We have 29 to 35% unemployment before COVID-19. Little has changed in that respect. Life expectancy in South Africa in 1994 is about 63 years of age. It's about 63 years of age today. But that has everything to do with the HIV pandemic, which has greatly impacted the country's life expectancy. And so there are a lot of other socioeconomic factors that have improved and others that have been stagnant. The amount of income that people make is significantly larger today, even inflation adjusted, than it was then. But South Africa's population in 1994 was about 43 million people. Today it's 57 million people, or 60, some people are claiming. Well, let's say 57 million people. So it's gained 14 million people in that time. In 1994, well, in 1911, in the first census for South Africa, whites, Europeans represented 20% of the population in South Africa, and blacks were just 67%. Today, blacks are 79% of the population in South Africa, and whites are down to about 9%. So the numbers for whites are pretty stagnant. They've stayed about the same number of white South Africans, but that's in large measure by less in-migration since the end of apartheid. There used to be significant in-migration of whites into South Africa prior to the end of apartheid. So less in-migration and lots of net out-migration to the UK especially, but to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, even to the United States. Large numbers of South Africans, white South Africans, have left the country. So if you take that into account, and if all those people were there with their kids, the white population would have grown larger too, and likely would have retained most of its percentage at 13% that it was in 1994. In 1994, 13% of the population was white at 43 million people. Today, it's about 9% with 57 million. So that's some of the things that would have changed. Let's see, what else we got? The activities in the Army has been worrying. Yeah, Tercia, yeah, the Army, yeah, so this is a problem when an Army becomes a jobs program and you use a military to simply provide jobs for people rather than having a professional military that's focused on its core mission. And its core mission is necessary to be achieved by having a proper workforce, not having workforce divided. Well, we can have this many whites, this many coloreds, this many blacks. Okay, our submarine has 2 white guys and 35 black guys because that's what we've decided in the interest of equity. Well, that's not equity, folks. The submarine sinks, they all die. Okay? So if you have insufficient numbers of black South Africans who can work on the submarine, then you need to be focused on properly training black South Africans and recruiting volunteers. And if you can't get them because they don't want to do it, then you have to create incentives like extra pay, submariner pay, things like that. But that has not been the focus of the SANDF. The SANDF is not focused on these things at all. And so you get an Army that goes out and we see some professional soldiers who are committed in large measure because they have good leadership in their unit. And you see others out there beating people and chasing people and threatening them. And that is not the role of the military, not the role of the military. And the SANDF should be ashamed of that conduct. Now, they have spoken out against it and addressed it, but it should have been something that was covered long before the Army was deployed to the streets. You bring these people in, you brief them, and you warn them that there will be consequences to misbehavior. If people, when I was in the National Guard, we were trained to deal with civil disturbances and riot control, things like that. So we would march with the shields, the helmets, with the visor and nightsticks and truncheons. And we were very restrained in how we did that. But we were taught how to do that to ensure that we were protected, but also to protect the crowd with as least damage as possible. I don't see the SANDF getting that sort of training, and that's unfortunate. So yeah, I'm concerned about activities during lockdown by the SANDF. I love YouTube today. Looks like the promise. Don't hold your breath. Just a ghost. You just said he almost mentioned those little tiny crawling things around. Don't do that. Maybe something will happen. Terzi says small businesses are in crisis. Take dance schools for example. How do they return? Well, yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is what it goes back to, Tercia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I was talking about the informal economy from the very outset of these lockdowns around Africa and in South Africa in particular, especially South Africa because it's a draconian, all activity ceased. And I talked about the need to have some sort of subsidy or helpful program for informal economy. And that's difficult to do because people in the informal economy don't pay taxes, they're not registered, and they don't meet safety standards for certain things that everyone else has to meet. And so they don't want to be captured by the formal economy. But how do you make payments then? Otherwise, anybody can walk up and say, well, I change tires and I'd like my payment, I have a business. So you have to be careful of fraud. But one of the things I talked about is that in the informal sector, there are solutions to this. So for instance, informal traders, the guys who sell stuff on the side of the streets, CDs or sunglasses, what's that? Brillante, son brillante. So they sell those things on the side of the road, or people sell scratch cards for airtime, SIM card. those informal businesses, they could be allowed to work. We have soccer pitches and we have stadiums and open fields and we have parking lots in malls. There's nothing that could say that, like, for instance, part of the parking lot at Menlyn, now, I'm not encouraging this, I'm just saying, but say parking lot in Menlyn in Pretoria, you leave one part of the parking lot open only for informal traders, and you set up some fence around it or barriers around it, and you have someone there to control people coming in. You have wash points so they can wash their hands. If you have hand sanitizer, that too. And then the traders can have little tables set up. It doesn't take much in the way of resources, and people can come in and they can hawk their wares. Now, it's not ideal because a lot of informal traders make their money by being able to convince you to buy something, by making you feel guilty or having the gift of gab. And it's getting more challenging for them if they have to maintain social distance to get that gift of gab if they can't get close to you. But that doesn't make it impossible. And at least it's an effort to try. Now, that won't help, as Tercia says here, it's not going to help people who have dance studios, who have a formal business or informal. It's not going to help people who do hair salons or people who do nails. You can't do manicures and pedicures and maintain social distance. It just doesn't work. No one has an 8-foot nail file. We can do somebody's nails at a distance. So some businesses are going to be impacted by this and affected by this, and there's just little we can do as long as social distancing is involved. There are other methods that if you're going to go to a business like that, if you've been tested for it and you have evidence of it, that's not foolproof, but it's a method. I don't encourage it because it starts to create a bifurcated society, and it will make the disease be something that has stigma. It'll be like people with leprosy or people with HIV, and we don't want to be near those people. Keep them separate from us. So we have to be very careful. But there are creative ways that we can address the informal sector of the economy, and much of the formal sector should be able to go back to business. There's no reason that people can't go to banks. Here in the States, we have lockdown and people are going to drive-through. So I'm not a fan of drive-through banking, but they're doing that. But we can have banking. There's nothing that says you can't put plexiglass up to prevent germs from getting across to someone and have someone in the lobby coming through and wiping down surfaces repeatedly and correctly. There's nothing that says that you can't do that. So we need to be more creative, and certainly it needs to happen soon. This is just destroying. Hundreds of millions of people are being pushed into poverty now, and it will take a long time for many of these people to recover and get out of it. Really, really sad. It's such a shame, and I really feel bad for a lot of people. It really is. It is unfortunate. I've lost some money from consulting as a consequence of this because training I was going to teach has been canceled. It cost me a significant amount of money. It's unfortunate. I missed the money. I could use the money, but I'm not going to be eating cat food or digging through trash cans because I've planned well for events like this. And also I do have a steady income as a result of my service. So anyway, so I do feel bad for others. But let's see what else. So in the conversation, they had an interesting article and they talked about several things related to this and talking about rights and how freedom has been curtailed, about the police and the army and the streets, which I've mentioned already, and then also about the right to freedom of assembly, which is gone. That's just unfortunate. We make it to the point where sports return, but to empty venues. So maybe we'll see the Curry Cup take place, but it'll just be the players, the coaches, the announcers, and empty stadiums. Or we might get to a stage at some point where sport events can come back, but then what happens is you only have a certain amount of the crowd. You can only have half the stadium full or 1/3 of the stadium full. So people have to sit so many seats apart. But even that doesn't fix things because if you sit in a row, you get up, you have to walk past the person and you come in contact with them. So I'm not sure how they do it. I think the more likely prospect is that we'll see sports resume if they have the money to resume, if they haven't gone bankrupt. We've already seen some sporting leagues fail. Here in the United States, in professional football, that's American football, the throwing, not the soccer football. But we had a league that started 20 years ago. It did 1 year, collapsed. It came back this year called the XFL. And it's similar to American football like the NFL, but with some rules changes, and it plays in different seasons. So they started, they got through 5 games, and they had huge crowds. I went to the opening game for Washington, D.C., for the DC Defenders, and it was a huge crowd. It was people were very much into it. It was wonderful at Audi Field, wonderful place, great experience, a lot of fun. The game was kind of boring, but they won the game, and now that league has folded. They've gone out of business. They're bankrupt, just like that. Concerns about Major League Rugby here in the States, whether it can survive. I hope it does. I'd hate to see it go away, and the impact of this on other sports leagues. We should be in the middle or at the start of baseball season now, and here we have no baseball, which is a big deal in the United States. Let's see. Mark Gardner, all bank tellers in South Africa have bulletproof glass in front of them. Yeah, exactly, Mark. Yeah. Well, yeah. What about the cash in transit heist? What do we do there? Do we make sure that we put plexiglass up inside the vehicle so that when the cash in transit heist happen, that the robbers don't infect the drivers of the anyway, so the bank vehicles? Yeah, bulletproof glass. Absolutely. Well, that's true. It is true. Um, yeah, but not the inquiries. Plexiglass to do the job. Yeah, so the inquiry. So if you go to a bank to ask about your bank business, you sit down at a desk with someone and you're right in front of them. Well, you can put plexiglass up. That will make a difference. And then you can't just have the plexiglass up there because stuff comes out of your mouth and you have it. You're a vector for the virus. Then it's on the plexiglass in small particulate particles or in phlegm or whatever. So you have to have someone come after every person comes through and clean the plexiglass properly before someone else sits down. But there are ways to do this rather than simply hampering and crippling business. And you have to wonder, here in the United States, we're doing the same thing. We are seeing immense restrictions on our freedom, things that we have never seen since the Second World War. Or the Civil War, things like that, when habeas corpus was suspended and the president simply locked people up, just did it. And the suspension of our civil liberties. So it's not something we're accustomed to in the United States, but we're seeing it all the time. And a lot of people are going with it voluntarily, but there's going to be a point in which it won't. We've already had demonstrations across the United States. Here in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg, just 15 minutes away from me at the state capitol, 25 kilometers. We had a huge demonstration last week. And while I support the concept of freedom of assembly and free speech, and that's what I fought for, defending the Constitution for this country for 36 years, the conduct of many of the people at that particular demonstration I found disturbing. I saw the footage. It was supposed to be just based in your car, drive through the state capitol, honk your horn, wave your banners and your pickup truck, your bakkie and things like that to get people's attention. But a lot of people parked their vehicles, got out and clustered on the street, and they're well within a couple feet of each other, not wearing masks, not wearing surgical gloves, and not leaving a good image. And so, in my view, not good behavior. And so that's a sort of demonstration I don't really support. I wish people would behave themselves. In fact, one of my former colleagues at the Army War College, who's now a state senator in Pennsylvania, famously was part of that demonstration and stood outside demonstrating with people and then walked inside to serve in Parliament in the Senate that day. So anyway, Kung Fu, let's see what you got to say. Sports should be played without fans. However, I wonder how safe that would be for the players. Well, yeah, of contact. Well, for any sports, except for maybe tennis with the exception, then you wouldn't be able to shake hands after the match. But any sport, there's contact or close contact amongst players. So the issue there is that what you have to do is you have to have a robust rapid test system and a blood-based system. Everyone in the sport would have to have a system in which they and their immediate family during the lockdown would be subject to testing voluntarily. They wouldn't be able to play. And the same for referees and for announcers and people who had provide security and such at the stadium. All those people would have to have blood tests and then rapid test kits, and everyone would be given rapid test kits, every saliva test every day, something like that. And then as we build up, we could have it. It wouldn't eliminate the risk, but it would greatly reduce it. Also bear in mind that the vast majority of people who are getting the virus and having symptoms, remember, 80% of people who have COVID-19 are asymptomatic. Either they have a mild flu or they have little to no symptoms. They don't even know they've been sick. We just had a major medical study done in Florida in which 6% of the population has already developed antibodies, which means they've already been exposed to the virus without even being sick. Almost none of those people came in for treatment. So remember that the vast majority of people who fall ill and those who die from the virus are people who have an underlying healthcare issue, an autoimmune system compromised. So what are we talking? People with HIV, lupus, cancer, hypertension, high blood pressure, asthma, all these different things that contribute. So you have an immune system that's already compromised, and this is a particularly opportunistic invader that takes advantage of your body, uses its RNA to hijack your system, and makes you incredibly sick. And those who die almost entirely, not all, but 90+%, well in the high 90%, are people with some sort of underlying condition. Bear in mind that most sports players don't have these underlying conditions. Some do. I mean, we famously saw J.R. Richard collapse and die playing baseball from a heart condition. And we've seen other athletes have issues on the field. But the vast majority of those who perform in high-performance sports, professional sports, are people in good health without an underlying health condition. Therefore, their risk is greatly diminished. And so you can take measures, and we can have these events. And I think we should have these events. We should continue them. I think the National Hockey League should resume its season here in the United States. I would do it by May 15th, and I would renew it. And then what would happen is that my telephone's ringing. I'm going to have to ignore that. But I have no idea who that is. Anyway, so that's a computer talking to me. Hopefully it'll shut up here in a second. But anyway, so what happens is I think the National Hockey League should resume, say, by May 15th, and then spend a week in exhibition games, have 2 or 3 games in which players get their legs stretched again and get accustomed playing against each other again. And then what will happen is they'll be able to play the games, but without fans in the stands. That would be very helpful. Someone's calling me, leave a message. I have no idea who it is. I need to turn down my ringer on that speaker system. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so sports should come back. Let's see what else. And a study in New York showed that 14% already had well, I would suspect that in New York City, especially, those exposed to the virus is a much higher percentage of the population than you have. Oh, that's a very annoying system. I wish it would shut up. Oh my God. Oh, shut up. The best laid plans. The best laid plans. You try to set up an event and not have distractions, and now somebody calls my home phone and leaves an incredibly long voicemail for me, or answer machine, as the UK they like to say. But anyway, back to this. Sorry about that, folks. Let's see. I lost track of it. Sports. Yeah, New York, New York. So I'm not surprised at all that New York has at least 14% of people who've been exposed to the virus and have antibodies to it. It's a tightly packed metropolitan area. We've seen New York absolutely obliterated by this disease, and so it's not surprising to me. All right, what else? I'd like to see the virus try and catch a Formula One car. Mark. Well, the virus will catch a Formula One car, Mark. I know you're being facetious, but the car in the pit stop will have people come out, change the tires, put their hands all over the driver's side, adjust the equipment on the driver. Yeah, so it can spread. But I get your point. You're being facetious. Let's see what else. Just to go. No. ICE says that it was based on a study of 3,000 people in New York City. In Florida, the study was based on over 6,000, if I'm not mistaken. It's Tudu. He doesn't have Windows. Our teachers are in grave danger of exposure in the overfull classrooms whenever returns to school. Absolutely. And so this is one of the things under level 4 for South Africa being dropped from level 5 to level 4. What Cyril Ramaphosa announced a few days ago is that the classrooms will be greatly reduced in students. Now, how is that going to happen when you don't even have enough classrooms to begin with? So are some students going to be denied education? We'll see. The answer here is for the ANC, instead of buying things that they don't need or bailing out ESCOM and bailing out SAA, which they're finally not doing, instead of bailing out state-owned enterprises, take the money they're wasting there and put it into education. Instead of the money that's being stolen by members of the government and not prosecuting them to recover the funds, and things like money that went to the Guptas, among others, instead of that money disappearing from the state coffers that way, if it will be spent on education, then we can fix this. But it's not going to work now. I mean, you can't just roll out and the schools are there. But there should be a lot going on right now behind the scenes that simply isn't happening when it comes to education. It's very disappointing. Let's see. So back to the conversation article. So the author, and this was, let's see who the author was. Is it Amy? No, it's Emily Costello, who's deputy editor at the Conversation. Conversation does a really good job. They like their tagline is academic rigor, journalist flair. Academic rigor, journalist flair. The Conversation, really good site with some really insightful articles about topics around the world. But anyway, so she talks a lot about the restrictions on rights that South Africans are going through right now and how many have accepted it. But at some point, this is going to be a real problem. So let's see what else. What else do I have here? The Freedom Charter we talked about. Oh, yeah. So Al Jazeera ran an article about FW declaring apartheid was never prosecuted, South Africa's unfinished business. Well, if the intent was to prosecute people for apartheid, then why do we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And if the intent was to prosecute people for apartheid, do you really think that the apartheid regime would ever have surrendered authority on the possibility that they would be tried for their crimes, if there's no amnesty for it? So anyway, you got to wonder what people are thinking about there. You got to wonder what they're thinking about. HRS, or I don't know what that means, Tercia. I don't know that word. I see Basson, it makes me think of Bjorn Basson, the rugby player. I think about that. Well, anyway, so today is Freedom Day in South Africa, the 26th anniversary since the 27 April 1994 all-race elections, the first truly democratic elections in South Africa. And we're under the new dispensation. And during this time, the African National Congress has had absolute, uncontested control of the national government throughout those 26 years. And it has had control of all of South Africa's provinces with the exception of the Western Cape. And even then it had control, but only briefly, and then lost it over its incompetence. As far as the cities of South Africa, for much of this history, the ANC government has amalgamated smaller towns and villages into large metropolitan areas, thus eliminating mayor positions and city council positions in these towns, so that they fell into a much larger pool in which, of course, the ANC would have the votes. And so now you have the major metropolitan areas, which the ANC has controlled almost exclusively from 94 until 2016. However, famously in 2016, the ANC, as a consequence of the conduct of the Zuma government, state capture, service failure, service delivery failure, and things like that, the ANC lost control. They'd already lost control of Cape Town, which had held briefly and reverted back to the Democratic Alliance. But they lost control of the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, in which the plurality of the votes went to the Democratic Alliance. It didn't win a majority, unfortunately. So they lost control there. They lost control of Johannesburg, even though they had more votes in the city council than other parties. They didn't have enough to form a government on their own. And they lost control of Tshwane, the metropolitan area that includes the capital of Pretoria, that the world knows. The world doesn't know Tshwane, the world knows Pretoria. The one major city they did retain control of was Durban, also retain control of Bloemfontein, or Monang as it's now called by the ANC. They did retain control there. But the major metropolitan areas they lost control of. Now, since then, famously through subterfuge and endless underhanded political tactics, the ANC has regained control of Nelson Mandela Bay, even though they didn't win the election. They now control it through a coalition with their friends, the Economic Freedom Fighters and others. And then they've also regained control of Johannesburg because they had the plurality of votes there and were able to get a coalition together to win the election. So after Herman Mashaba, the Democratic Alliance mayor of Johannesburg, departed and then abandoned the party and complained about a bunch of things, the ANC now controls Johannesburg once again, but they do not control Tshwane. That's still outside their control. So for the vast majority of South Africa's new history, the new South Africa, it's been controlled by the African National Congress. 26 years, that's a long time, that's a lot of budgets, that's a lot of money for people to make an impact, to change things in 26 years. If you look at Zimbabwe, one could make the argument that despite the massacres that took place in Matabeleland from 83 to 87, despite that Zimbabwe made tremendous gains socioeconomically, I wouldn't say politically, but socially, certainly socioeconomically, in raising the economy, spreading proper education, primary and secondary education across the country to everyone, and at least rudimentary health care to most of the population, and also improved infrastructure in many respects. So for a decade, Zimbabwe was on a very good path and accomplished many things. In many respects, one could argue, in sheer terms of quality of life improvement, life expectancy, and things like that, ZANU-PF or ZANU was far more successful in its first 10 years than the ANC has been in 26 years. It's easy to say. Now, unfortunately, ZANU-PF is full of corrupt, disgusting, thieving, murdering, lying people. And so, of course, it has gone the other direction since 2000. And now the country is far worse than it's ever been, and in far greater misery than it even was under UDI, Universal Declaration of Independence, by the Rhodesian Front under Ian Smith. So Zimbabwe has gone very much in the wrong direction. Hopefully South Africa is not headed on that path, but a lot of people certainly have those concerns, and I certainly understand them. You know, for a long time, I was reticent to be overly critical of the ANC, giving them a free pass in some respects. No, I would point out when misconduct took place, but I would always say about the ANC, anecdotally, I would tell you that 60% of the ANC were dyed in the wool, committed, multiracial, capitalist, market-based, democratic, republic people. And about 40% of them are communist, we hate white people, kill them all, chase them all into the sea, nationalize everything, Marxist socialist. Now that's a simplified, simplistic explanation of the membership of the ANC. But for many years, this is the argument I told people. I said as long as the 60% held the sway and controlled the party, that South Africa had a chance. Its institutions were strong, its government was strong, its civil society had many strong factors, and South Africa had a chance for all South Africans. But when the scales tipped from 60-40 to 50-50, things would get dicey. If it went the other direction, we'd be in trouble. We certainly have reached the 50-50 threshold, as we saw with the election of Cyril Ramaphosa, by the moderates, the committed people to market-based economy and a multiracial society, who all of them, almost en masse, voted for Cyril Ramaphosa to lead the party. So that's the first thing we see. And then we see on the other side, when in Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, NDZ, many of the leftist Marxists get even, hate people. That side, that election was almost even, only about 79 votes between the two of them out of several thousand, about 5,000 delegates. So if 35 or 40 people had voted the other way instead of for Jacob Zuma, we'd be talking about President NDZ right now instead of, not Zuma, for Cyril Ramaphosa. We'd be talking about President NDZ instead of President Ramaphosa. So the party's already at a 50-50 split in my anecdotal assessment. That's not scientific, folks. You can't hold me to that. I'm just saying. And so now the concern is, do we see the populism that Cyril Ramaphosa put out in what was supposed to be a national holiday, a day of reconciliation, a day of people getting along, in which he's ignoring the history of South Africa by excluding whites who contributed to the liberation struggle and talking about colonialism as if the country is only a country for black people? Yes, he did say South Africa is for everybody. He mentioned whites and Asians and coloreds, but it was just one sentence. The majority of his discussion was talking about South Africa as black. It's not black. It's multiracial, and it has been for centuries. All right, let's see what else. Doc Breaker. Oh, Doc Breaker's here. Hey, Doc Breaker. I didn't know you were here. Welcome. People voted yes, never expected. This is the outcome. People who voted yes. Okay, I missed something here. Let me go back and see. Sean says, from what I've heard, the COVID-19 flu virus is less fatal to toddler children than the regular classic. Yeah, that is the case, Sean, from what we see in the statistics. But children can die from it. But the number of children who've died from COVID-19, particularly under the age of 5, is very small. We're talking very small numbers all around the world. If FW was so bad, why did he suggest and do the referendum and share a Nobel Peace Prize with Nelson Mandela? Good question, Nicholas. I'm going to come back to that. Let me get through the rest of these real quick. Sean says, seems there's a kernel of truth, as in babies in general don't have COVID. Yep. Nicholas, not just that. The people who voted yes never expected this is the outcome. I'll come back and ask Dogbreaker what he meant. People voted yes for the end of apartheid, the referendum. I think that's what he's talking about. Well, here's the deal. So I need to write a book on this. I really do. And maybe I'll get around to it if I get another visit to South Africa and look at some archives. But this has been my thesis all along on the end of apartheid. Here's the deal. MK didn't win. Now, the political opposition didn't force the end of apartheid. They might think that. They might claim that at the Apartheid Museum, and they might claim that in their rhetoric and their election campaigns, but they didn't. They had effect, but the reality is that the apartheid state had control of South Africa, and much of Southern Africa was in its grip economically as a consequence of its huge role in the region. And the end of apartheid has much more to do with external factors than it has to do with internal factors. And let me explain. Starbucks. I wonder if they'll pay me. Oh, by the way, folks, I've started a podcast, just an audio podcast, which I put on Podbean. And I did one on Sunday. I recorded Saturday night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, just to give it a test run and see how it goes. And right now it's a half-hour program. I'm going to do it at least once a week. I don't know if I'll do it every Sunday, but probably. We'll see how it goes. And it just runs through news and events of Africa and talks about them, and it gives a little bit of commentary on it. So it's not simply news, but a little bit of commentary as well. And so I did that. It's available on Podbean. I've got it loaded up so that it should show up on a few other sites. But anyway, if anyone's interested in that, just send me a note, and I'll make sure you get the link, or I'll tell you what, I'll put the link on the video at the end of this so that people can see it. But anyway, back to the issue. So the end of apartheid, a couple of things were going on. So people may remember that that the National Party, if you look at the evolution of the National Party politically and militarily and from a security standpoint, you'll see that by the late 1970s, the military, the police, and the intelligence services were having an outsized influence on government policy. And they were driving this from a couple standpoints. The first was the great black fear, the Swatkava, the fear of black nationalism and majority rule, which from their perspective was a legitimate concern. We watched as white Africa collapsed all around them, starting with the Portuguese in Mozambique and Angola in 1975, and the hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing from Angola, especially, but also from Mozambique, who came to South Africa and talking about horrific stories and their experiences there. We saw that. Then we also saw Zimbabwe become Zimbabwe in 1980 with majority rule. And then in 89, just before that, South Africa relinquished control of Namibia, and in 1990 it became Namibia. And so all around South Africa, we see the collapse of white rule and we see majority rule taking place. So Svatkovaro was one of the arguments that the National Party used for decades to warn people about the dangers of majority rule from their perspective, and it was a basis for them staying in political power, number one. Number two, and I think the more important issue here, because we can see examples of black ruled governments that weren't oppressive, that ruled democratically, and they were not a threat to South Africa. Botswana being one of them, right there, not a threat to South Africa, and a very effective government for a long time from '66 onward when it got its independence. But it's not alone. There's other parts of Africa where Senegal, there's many other places. Set examples. So what happens is the other issue, the overarching issue that for decades, starting particularly from the 60s going forward, but especially in the 70s and 80s, what the National Party argued to the white population of South Africa is that they were the last line of defense. They were the bulwark of Western civilization against the Marxists, against the communists, the red threat. And this was legitimate. It was a legitimate argument to make. Now, I don't think it was legitimate that was the basis for keeping apartheid, but what I'm saying is a legitimate argument to make about the threat of communism and the Soviets. And we can only need to look at the examples that you find in Africa, in Southern Africa. Angola, under the MPLA, Marxist-oriented, backed by East Germany, by the Soviets, by the Cubans, and in fact, 25,000 Cuban combat troops deployed to Angola. The Soviets generously equipped the MPLA with all kinds of Soviet aircraft and artillery and tanks and armored personnel carriers, Soviet advisors, East German advisors. So we see a white-ruled minority government in Angola collapse with the revolution in Portugal, independence in '75, Portuguese flee to Portugal and South Africa, among other places. And then we see a Marxist government take over, and it's a threat. And then it also supports later on SWAPO by allowing its guerrillas to operate out of southern Angola. So it is a genuine threat to the government. And the apartheid state makes the argument that communism is a threat. Same thing happens in Mozambique. Then we see Mugabe and ZANU come to control in Zimbabwe in 1980. Another avowed Marxist, but one who's in the Chinese camp, not really the Soviet camp. So now we're surrounded by people inspired by Soviet and Chinese communism, and this goes on and on. Well, the argument they made in the 60s and 70s, and especially in the 80s, is that they were the last line of defense against communism. But what happened? In 1989, the wall fell in Berlin. And in 1990, Germany unified. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the raison d'etre, for those who speak French, the reason for existing for the apartheid state could no longer be justified in the eyes of most white South Africans. Many white South Africans were willing to tolerate the injustice and the unfairness of the apartheid system based on their greater fears of black nationalism and or Soviet expansion and communism. Those things are what helped the National Party stay in power. If you look at South Africa, by the 1980s, the parliament was really no factor. The country was run by a small minority in the security intelligence services and the presidency. They ran it as an imperial country. And that's the truth of the matter. And once the white minority government in South Africa no longer tell white South Africans that if you don't keep apartheid, then communists are going to be here. They can no longer make the argument. Communism collapsed. And the reason for existing for the National Party, the reason for apartheid existing, evaporated with it. F.W. de Klerk saw this, he saw it clearly, and he realized that the change was coming, and it was better to do it when you can negotiate for it than when you actually have to fight for it, which wasn't really happening at the time. Despite the historical fairy tale narrative that the ANC likes to tell today, it wasn't really a consequence of conflict, it was a consequence of political settlement. But the deal was the Convention for Democratic South Africa, CODESA, took place, and when all the parties came together, the National Party, the Pan-African Congress, the ANC, they all came together, and they talked about what a democratic South Africa would be, what the new dispensation would be, and what would happen, and how we would go forward. And that's really what happened. That's why apartheid ended. And 63% of white South Africans eligible to vote voted to end apartheid. Clearly, Cyril Ramaphosa knows that. He was around. He was the lead negotiator for the ANC at the CODESA summit, a conference. He knows that, but he has selective memory because it's inconvenient for him. Well, let me see what else. Let me get back here and see what else. Promise not fulfilled. Doc Bricker, not so much. As Nicholas says, in 95, we united under the World Rugby Cup. It's the last 15 years. Yeah, the last 15 years, Nicholas, I would agree. This started towards the end of Mbeki's time. Since then, it's just been an utter disaster. And it just, the bad things exacerbated under Jacob Zuma. And they've not improved under Cyril Ramaphosa because not only have they not abandoned failed policies like BEE and this National Health Insurance Initiative and many other things. They're doubling down on it. Now we see this today at Freedom Day. Ramaphosa talks about, the dream deferred, and we need to deal with land and deal with redistribution of resources. That is not the solution. It doesn't help people in the end. Let's see. Christoph says, my personal view is that the world and the South African government sell a false idea to all people in South Africa, and that this is somehow all in the country will get along more. However, the hate among groups just grows. Well, the hate is being exacerbated by politicians. They're the ones playing this game, much like between the ANC and Inkatha Freedom Party in the early 1990s with the necklacing and the murders and the shootings and the rapes and things like that. This is political violence. And much of the ill will, people aren't just naturally inclined. Some people are just racist and they're inclined to hate each other. But white and black South Africans, Indians, and colors don't naturally just hate each other. That's a learned behavior. And not all of them do hate each other. Let me get that clear. Many people get along perfectly fine. But the differences that are being played up, and for instance, Cyril Ramaphosa today neglecting to mention a single white South African who contributed to the liberation struggle. That's not helpful. That creates in the minds of people who don't know better, who don't know history, who didn't deal with the struggle, who didn't live it, to think that no white South Africans contributed. And then when they see him on television saying that all white South Africans supported apartheid in parliament, then it reinforces the lie. It's simply not true. How do you get reconciliation when you intentionally, ethnically, racially divide people with your selective covering of events? And that's what Cyril Ramaphosa did today. And that should be called out. I shouldn't be the only person. In fact, I think I'll make a video about that. I'll make a prepared video just about his speech today in which I'll call him out on that. We'll see if anybody watches that. All right, let's see. Christoph says, in workplaces, all races act civil, but at their dinner tables, brides, events, most do talk the other races in bad light. I wouldn't say most. It happens a lot, but I wouldn't say most, Christoph. I've been all over South Africa, and I've hung out with blacks and whites and colors and Asians, and I've seen it. Yeah, some do really try. I think a lot of people really try. Let's see. Dogbreaker, I'm very convinced that the Inkatha Freedom Party took power. The outcome would have been very different. Yeah, Ronaldo Hughes is of the same opinion. He's seen, or not Hughes, Ronaldo Hose. I've anglicized his name from Hose to Hughes. Ronaldo Hose seems to believe the same thing, that if the IFP had won the elections, or at least won the majority of the votes, so they would have gone into a coalition, we'd had a very different history. I would argue that we would have been better served if the ANC didn't get enough to run the government on its own, say it had only a plurality, and then they would have had to rely on the IFP or the National Party for a coalition. They did have a coalition, but it was no need for a coalition. They outright won the election, but the National Party aligned with them. So they just did that for reconciliation, but it wasn't true reconciliation because the National Party members in that coalition really weren't doing anything. They were just occupying space until that party faded away and then was absorbed by the ANC. So I think that, yeah, if the IFP had gotten a larger share of the vote instead of just 9 or 10% of the vote, then they would have been a significant player and we would have seen a very different future. Mangosuthu Buthelezi is not a lunatic. He's not a clown. He's a very astute guy, and he certainly, I think, would have led in a very different fashion as the head of his party. And we would have had a very different outcome for South Africa. Maybe we'd be further down the road than we are today. But no, it turned into a place, just like much of Africa after liberation, independence, it's our turn to eat and take all of this stuff. And unfortunately, that's really sad for South Africa. Let's see. Christoph says he knows the real essay. Okay. Dogbreaker says, I've seen it firsthand, the IFP versus the ANC, and it was brutal. Oh, it was. Yeah, you were there, Nicholas, during the early 90s when this nonsense was going on. Yeah, black on black violence. And then they'll blame apartheid for it. Yes, there were operatives in this police who were doing underhanded things and pitting blacks against blacks, but there weren't people out there with white faces working for the government, standing behind these people, pushing them and forcing them to engage each other and murder each other and rape women in the brutal fashion that was going on. Truly, truly, truly video. Nicholas says, so watch the video with gusto. Well, then I will make the video with gusto, and I'll try to remember to wear this Madiba jersey. This is a really cool jersey. What do you guys think of this jersey, by the way? Do you guys like this jersey? I mean, I don't like the selling of the Nelson Mandela brand. That a lot of people, I think, exploit Mandela and his reputation and his name and his image. It gets a bit much. But this, his face isn't on this, but we all know that this is a tribute to Nelson Mandela. And I thought it was a really cool jersey, even though it's a bizarre pattern, but it's kind of with this traditional clothing from the Eastern Cape. So what do you guys think of this jersey? Do you like the jersey? I mean, I really like it. And for me, that's unusual. I don't usually like things that venerate. For instance, South Africa came out with Nelson Mandela on the Rand notes before he died. I took great exception to that. I didn't like that. I understood why they did it, but I mean, putting someone's face on currency to me is something you do for someone from the past. You don't do it when someone's alive, because it really just creates a cult of hero worship, which I didn't really like. But I was opposed to. A lot of people seem to think it was a great idea while he was still alive. I didn't like it at all. I was fine having the wildlife, the big five on the currency, as opposed to the Jan van Riebeck and the historical history that we used to see on the Rand before '94. Then we saw the big five on the bills after that, and now we see Mandela. I'm fine with Mandela being on the bills now. It makes sense, but not before he died. I found that distasteful. But that's my personal view. Let's see what else. Christoph says, for example, grew up in the Northwest in Potchefstroom, then moved to Parle and Stellenbosch, then to Graaff-Reinet. I was liberal most of my life. Okay. Are you not liberal anymore, Christoph? I suspect you probably are. You're probably just frustrated. Liberal in the sense that, I'm a political conservative in America, but I'm liberal from a standpoint of Western liberalism about human dignity, rights, freedoms, speech, assembly, things like that. The right to self-determination. That's liberalism. And I suspect you're probably still there, Christoph. You're probably just really frustrated by what's going on. Finished school in Mpumalanga. But you have been all over South Africa. You had to come to Pretoria to see my views change. Okay. Variable Vision says, Cyril Ramaphosa is clearly pandering to the far left, the ANC, and the radical black nationalists. Notice in his latest address to the nation how he thanked farm workers but omitted farmers. Yeah, yes, indeed. Funny that. There would be no farm workers were it not for the farmers who are responsible for it. Graaff-Reinet is a beautiful place now, or a national park steeped in history. Yeah, no, Graaff-Reinet does have a long history. Of course, it is kind of like the edge of the 8-9 wars between Boers and the Xhosa. That whole region there is just fascinating historically. How the Xhosa advanced, the Boers advanced, Xhosa, Boer, back and forth, intermixing, the struggles, the fights, the betrayals. Fascinating stuff. Oh, cool jersey. Envious. And he's, look at it, all caps. You got a break between the letters of that jersey. Yeah, it's really cool, Nicholas. Well, if you contact some Chinese, I'm sure they can make a pirated version for you. They're very good at that. Intellectual property theft and copyright theft, the Chinese. Sean says, it's going to be hard to get independence from South Africa, globalist puppet government, but not impossible. Luckily, we don't have to vote to declare independence. Next stop is a cover GQ. That'd be nice. Yeah, that'd be something else. Yeah, so let's see, where were we at? Oh, yeah, so I was talking about F.W. de Klerk. So I think it was Nicholas or somebody earlier was asking a question about F.W. de Klerk, who made a comment that, if he's such a bad guy, how do you get the Nobel Peace Prize and end apartheid? Yeah, the problem is that in the political environment that you have in South Africa today, the politically correct people, the language police inside the ANC, in the media and in social media, and the EFF, of course, these are the people who police South Africa's public spaces. And when you say things, they're greatly taken out of context. So, for instance, the famous imbroglio over Helen Zilla's tweet about, not everything about colonialism was bad. And it was, she's a racist. Excuse me. Stop. Okay, first off, let's talk about what colonialism is, and let's get this into proper context here. She didn't advocate for colonialism. She didn't say it was a wondrous system that was great for everyone. She said that there were things that came out of colonialism that benefited South Africa, and it's true. But she was lambasted and called a racist and all sorts of other things. And then by the same token, F.W. de Klerk took exception to apartheid being called a crime against humanity. Well, on its basic root, the concept of apartheid is apartness, separateness, essentially self-determination. But the implementation of the political system, in many respects, resulted in crimes against humanity. But the system itself but he got lambasted for that. And the people were attacking him. And so Mia Swart writes this article. I don't know if she's Afrikaans or if she's colored. I'm not familiar with Mia Swart. But she writes this article and said, former President de Klerk's denial that apartheid was a crime against humanity is cause for reflection on Freedom Day. Indeed it is. And so is the hysteria over his comments. It's pause for reflection. He was a member of the government for a long time. He didn't oppose apartheid. This is all true. But he is the architect of ending it. He's not the person initiated, by the way. P.W. Botha is the guy that started this. He's the one who had secret talks and had Nelson Mandela brought from Robben Island over to meet with him clandestinely to talk about a negotiated settlement to end apartheid in the late 1980s, before P.W. Botha was out of office after his heart attack. So de Klerk, they're trying to paint him in an unfavorable light and create a mythology about him that he's an unrepentant racist and an apologist for apartheid. No, I don't agree with that. And I think the hysteria about F.W. de Klerk is greatly overblown. Um, the sad thing for F.W. de Klerk is that, like Mikhail Gorbachev, he will not be remembered for the great contributions that he made because the people writing the narrative are people of a different ilk, and they'll forget about that. But the worm turns in history, and at some stage things change, and people remember people in a different fashion, different light. So we'll see what happens in the future. Maybe this will stop, and he'll be remembered in a different light. You know, it's very frustrating to see how people contort things. The one that really irritates me the most is the way that people treat Helen Zille. The ANC members of parliament called her a whore and a prostitute when she became the premier of the Western Cape, and she created a cabinet that was all male. Well, she's a whore because she only wants men. Excuse me? First off, that's not even acceptable discourse when it comes to the public sphere. The fact that the ANC never sanctioned or disciplined its members of parliament for their foul language and their abusive, misogynist attacks and racist attacks against Helen Zille speaks volumes about the ANC and what it really means. And that's when I first started to turn against the ANC, when it attacked Helen Zille. I know who Helen Zille is. I don't know her personally, but I know what she did during the struggle, and I know her role in the anti-apartheid movement. And her liberation credentials are impeccable, despite the lies the EFF clowns want to yap at your heels telling you about Helen Zille. And every time they lose their mind over something she says. The woman is brilliant. She's been amazing. Does she make mistakes? Of course she does. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. We say things we don't really mean, or we say things in the heat of the moment. But none of what I'm talking about applies to Helen Zille in any of these cases. So it's interesting to see her. I really was looking forward to our tea with Helen. It kind of went away very fast. It looked like an interesting opportunity for a conversation. But yeah, Helen Zille, fascinating person. So let's see what else we got here. AABE sports quotas. Yeah, black on white racism is accepted by these. Yeah, it is. And anyone who this really irritates me. We hear this in the States too. Well, black people can't be racist. Excuse me? What? Then you don't understand what racism is. You don't understand what racism is if you think a black person can't be racist. A racist is someone who thinks that one race is better, superior to another race, which is pure, utter bullshit. It's cock. Oh, there's profanity. That's the first time I used it. English and Afrikaans, profanity. It's absolute garbage. No one is superior. We've already covered this. I've talked about this already. And because a person has darker skin pigmentation doesn't mean they can't be a racist. Now, if you want to make the argument about whether someone is able to oppress someone under a political system based on their skin color, that's a different argument, but that's not about racism. So, for instance, here in this country, David Duke is a racist. David Duke is famously extreme right racist who supports segregation and as opposed to black rule of any sort. So David Duke is a racist, but so is, now I'm drawing a blank here. What's his name there? Louis Farrakhan from the Muslim Nation, the Muslim Brotherhood. Louis Farrakhan is an avowed racist, an absolute racist, as is Barack Obama's former minister in Chicago. Remember that guy? The chickens will come home to roost, not God bless America, but God damn America. Yeah, that's a racist who thinks that one group is better than another. And then Tutu on Ronaldo Host's program said, go watch this video between Sean Hannity and some guy named Khalid Mohammed or something like that. And I listened to it. It wasn't a video. It was actually an audio from a radio program from years ago. And I listened to it. And this guy comes on and he says, well, the black man is superior to white man in all forms. And there's evidence to support this. That's all I need to hear. And if a white guy come on and said white people are superior to black people, that would have been all I need to hear. That's racism. That's utter nonsense. People will perpetuate that, and the ANC accepts that and perpetuates that. It's one thing to make quotas or BEE, which is racially discriminatory, and that's bigotry. It's quite another to be a racist. And the ANC is happy to allow racism to take place in South Africa, as long as it's coming from the mouths of people like Julius Malema or Floyd Shivambu and his other clowns in the EFF, or members of the ANC themselves. But the way they treated Helen Zille is just abysmal. And it just says a lot about them. And history will judge them for that. Maybe not today. Let's see. Of course, liberals incorrectly used to associate classic liberalism with socialism. That's correct, variable. Yeah, that is what happens. That's not liberalism. And here in America, it's distorted too, because in America, you're either conservative or you're liberal. A more accurate description is many of us are liberal on both sides of the aisle. We believe in Western liberalism, but politically conservative is a fiscal conservative or social conservative, as opposed to a liberal, fiscal liberal or a social liberal. But then you have the far left, Whoops, I went off the screen. I'm so far out here on the left, I fell off a cliff here. So you have the far left that are progressives, and that's the real term. That's where you find the Marxists and the socialists and the state control and those who try to dictate to us how our lives are supposed to be. And you find the politically correct who try to police your speech and try to distort everything that people say and try to create friction between groups. And that's what they're all about. So very different. Liberalism is not what the popular press portrays it as. And those who have a good education know that. Obviously, Variable Vision has a good education. So let's see. Sean says, Chris White, on the subject of paper money, they put Woodrow Wilson on a very large denomination bill, not for public use, as a pat on the back for the Bretton Woods Treaty. Really? I mean, what does Woodrow Wilson have to do with Bretton Woods? I didn't know that. He's on the $1,000 bill. I thought that was Salmon Chase, but I'm not sure what bill Woodrow Wilson was on, but he was president the First World War. Bretton Woods came about in 1944. So that may be true. I was unaware of that, and I don't even know which bill he's on. Like I said, I'm trying to remember he's on the $1,000 bill, but you don't see $1,000 bills in circulation, but they were put in circulation. Christoph says, I would say I used to be a liberal conservative. Now I'm conservative liberal. Yeah, okay, I'll buy that. I'm a conservative liberal. I'm with you. Sounds like we're in the same boat. Tercia says, Helen Zilla is abused routinely. Her behavior towards the racist is amazingly restrained. Yeah, it is. Listen, Tercia, yeah. Helen Zilla has been nothing but fantastic when it comes to dealing with people who've been abusive and shameful towards her. The misogyny is beyond the pale. You know, I get a kick out of all the politically correct people who, anytime somebody, like for instance, I argue against two issues that come up here in the States. One is the argument about STEM, and the other argument is about equal pay. Both of them, I think, are greatly distorted and misleading narratives. When it comes to STEM, for instance, that's science, technology, education, and mathematics. I'm sure most people knew that, but STEM, education. We have endless efforts here in the United States to promote STEM for women. Women are denied positions in science. Women aren't prominent in science. Women don't. That's bull. That's utter nonsense. For 20 years now, 60% of postgraduate students in STEM programs in the United States universities are women. Only 40% are men. So now 2 generations, academic generations of people who've graduated from master's and PhD programs have been predominantly women. Women are outnumbering men entering the field every day. And even in leadership positions in the STEM fields, they lead across the board. So this myth is dangerous to society. To perpetuate this myth about STEM and how girls are denied science. The story that, well, she's a girl, she's not good in math. I don't know what school they went to, but when I went to high school, the people who were good in mathematics were the girls. And that was 40 years ago. They're the ones that studied stuff. I was terrible at mathematics. So the STEM argument is nonsense. I argued against it. But of course, I'm attacked as being misogynist because I'm not in favor of women's rights. No, that's nonsense. Who said that? That's not women's rights. That's preferential treatment based on sexual gender. That's not right. That's not fair. That's mistreating one group of people to favor another people based on an artificial, well, not artificial, just a physical difference. And that's wrong. Girls can't control their gender any more than boys can. I know sexual reassignment, that's a whole other argument. We're not talking about that. We're talking about male and female. All right, traditional male, female. So yeah, I have an issue with that. The other issue I have an issue with is when it comes to equal pay. There's a reason why women, even in same career fields, have trailing pay over men. And it has to do with biology. It has to do with the fact that many women leave the workforce or take restrictions on their career potential and opportunities. You can't expect a company that works in the IT industry to have a man and a woman hired at the same time, same degree, same experience, work for the company for 10 years, then the woman, because she wants to have a family, the male can't do this because he doesn't get pregnant. She leaves the firm, is gone for 2 years. He stays, gets the company hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts based on the work he did, which she probably would have done the same thing had she been there. She comes back and now she's entitled to the same pay and benefits as he is. That's ludicrous. Is it fair? Yes, it is fair. Is it fair in life in the big scheme of things? No, but I mean that's biology. And so it's not fair to artificially carry somebody and let them take a break. You know, do I get a sabbatical because as a man I feel oppressed? Come on. So I often get attacked as misogynist for that nonsense, but it's nonsense. I've done more to advance women's rights and equality in the workplace, particularly in Africa, than most people who run around and claim to do it. So I don't listen to those people. And Helen's very good at not listening to them too. I really appreciate that she does that. It's good that she doesn't listen to that nonsense because it's a lot of nonsense, folks. All right, so let's see what else we got here. Christoph was answering Tercia, saying yes because she's torn in the side. She's a thorn in the side of some. Yeah, she's really a thorn in the side, and so that lets you know that she's effective. When the DA won the Western Cape and she became the premier, the ANC was apoplectic. They were so annoyed, so unhappy, and they were really angry. And they took their anger out on Helen Zille because she was the face of the DA. And, she'd been leading the party and now she was leading Western Province. So anyway, she was voted the best mayor in the world, best major city mayor in the world. And it was a well-earned honor when she got that, when she was the Cape Town mayor. Anyway, let's see. Racism does nothing but breed more racism. Absolutely. Stupidity does nothing but add to more stupidity. STEM research is all over Twitter. Yep. Let's see. Our government is cock, but our first lady is a doctor, got her master's from Harvard in public health. Wonder how much she influenced our brilliant performance in the control of COVID-19. Is that an endorsement for what the South African government has done with regard to COVID-19? Okay. Nicholas is pushing women's denial. Some paleontologists I follow are brilliant and are female. Listen, I really love astronomy, and if I had any math skills, I might have been an astronomer, and if I was also willing to take a really small salary, because mostly government or education positions, you're not going to make much money there. But if I had better math skills, I might have been an astronomer because I absolutely love space and astronomy. I absolutely love it. Boy, I'll tell you, the New Horizons probe to Pluto, talk about excited. I was so excited. I was always apoplectic when the software crashed the probe as it was approaching Pluto and they had nothing. They thought they lost it. I was like, oh, all that time wasted. But then we got back these amazing photographs of Pluto, and we see that it's an active world, and it is a world. It is a planet. No, it's not a dwarf planet. It's a real planet. I don't care what these people say. Anyway, but if I'd had better skills, I would have been an astronomer. But my point about that is that if you watch the programs that focus on astronomy that appear on Science and Discovery and all these other channels, National Geographic, you'll see that they often interview astronomers. And so we see tons of women who are senior people in the field of astronomy and physics who appear on these programs. Half the people on these programs are almost always women or more. So the fact that women aren't in STEM is just nonsense. It's a myth. Now, someone could say, well, but they've taken the only women known. No, that's simply not true. Go check out some of these departments at universities and research facilities. More importantly, go to pharmaceutical companies and see who's doing the research, developing vaccines, developing treatments, developing antiretrovirals, full of chemists who are women and physicians and things like that. Anyway, so I like to subvert the expectations of people and undermine their mythology. Thorn, yeah, Thorn. I think that's okay. Falcon 9 launching humans for the first time next month into space to the International Space Station. Is that where the Falcon 9 is taking them, Kung Fu? The Falcon 9 is the one we want to use to get people to Mars, I think, but we're not going to Mars yet. We outperform the USA. Death toll as low as that of Germany. Well, that's okay. That's yeah, but at what cost, Tercia? And the comparison to the USA is not legitimate, I don't think, because you don't have a federal system. We have a federal system in which our Constitution sets certain authorities to different levels of government. And so it hampers national responses in some aspects. If you look at the number of people affected or infected base per million, we're middle of the road. And that's despite the fact, also, we have hundreds of thousands of flights coming here every day. So unless Trump had stopped all flights into the United States, we were going to get this disease. The mistake was that when he was attacked as a racist and a xenophobe by stopping flights from China, he stopped there and waited an additional 2 weeks before he stopped Europe, and then the next day stopped the United Kingdom and Ireland. That all should have been done at the beginning of January. And when he did it, I wasn't on the air doing things, but I said, yes, we should be stopping all travel because you're not stopping the virus. If you stop people from coming to China, China deals with the world, has massive flights to Europe and to Asia and Africa. So if you don't let people come in from China, they're simply going to go from China to Italy or the UK to Africa and spread it that way. So we get the virus coming in from all kinds of routes. So you have to stop all travel. We didn't do that. South Africa didn't do that until much later. And so I'm not really sure you can compare the United States with South Africa. If we want to have the conversation about whether the United States has been successful, and I would say that authorities in the state of New York have been abysmal at this, and in fact were a contributing factor to the spread and pervasivity of this virus. As late as the middle of February, members of the city council and city government running around encouraging people to go to local fairs and events and telling them that it was that the federal government was giving bad advice when in fact they were the ones giving the bad advice and they weren't following the advice the federal government had put out. So we have states like that that have contributed to this mess. If you look at our total statistics, New York has like over 200,000 infections, and they have thousands of deaths. If you take New York and that area, New York, the surrounding area, New Jersey, and Connecticut out of the equation, this pandemic in the United States is far less severe. Look at the map. You'll see the maps distorted of the United States where they paint everything red, but look at the actual number of cases. Like look at a map of Pennsylvania. It's available. Do Pennsylvania COVID-19, and you'll find a map on Google by the state, and it lists all the counties are in red, some dark red. It's very scary. But click on the counties around Philadelphia, you'll see 18, 25,000 cases, or not 18, thousands of cases here. And then you go 2 counties across where I'm at, 3 counties across, 2 hours away by car, and we have 600 cases in a county of 450,000 people. It's not the same magnitude. And even so, I go back to this whole issue, and this is where changing the lockdown, modifying the lockdown, or getting rid of the lockdown comes into play, is that this year, 620 to 650,000 people will die globally from malaria. After 5, nearly 6 months of COVID-19 around the globe, now I know that the lockdown has had an impact on limiting the spread of it, and it could have spread even more, but given the fact that 80% of people who get it aren't falling sick and aren't in these numbers, they aren't even being tested, that you're not going to see much of a change ultimately, is my point. But 5 months into this crisis, we have 200,000 people who've died attributed to it. And those numbers are suspect, especially here in the States where, like in New York, they just say people who died had respiratory disease. Well, they didn't even test them. They died from COVID-19. So 5 months into this now, we are seeing 200,000 people dead from this in 5 months, but we'll see 600 plus thousand die from malaria alone. We'll see 800,000 people this year die from suicide around the world before COVID-19. It's probably going to be higher as a result of COVID-19 because of social isolation and hysteria and panic and paranoia and just, all kinds of things. We see, my point is that the actions that governments are taking at this stage, no matter how much they argue it was appropriate at the beginning, it's getting progressively more difficult, progressively more difficult to argue that this is the right approach in how we deal with COVID-19. We're simply not seeing the impact of this. First off, the World Health Organization came out, 3.4% of people die of fatality. That's a high rate. For every 100 people that get it, 3.4 die. That's really high. The influenza is typically 1/10 of 1%. Based on the information now we're getting from proper studies, proper medical data, proper research in Florida and New York, we're finding out that the actual death rate is, like many of us, including myself, have said, far lower than 1%. Even without this data, just the information they're sharing wasn't consistent to say it was 3%. Now we're seeing that it's more like it's 0.1%, more in line with the common flu. The one difference with this virus, it does seem to be much easier to catch it. Highly infectious, highly infectious. And that's the problem. And that's why the governments are panicking the way they are. But they need to change or they're going to destroy the world. There'll be a revolution of some sort. Let's see what else I missed here. Okay, so Falcon 9 with the Dragon capsule launching astronauts at the International Space Station again. Yeah, excellent, Christoph. Thanks for that. Teresa says UCT top 3 engineering students are all girls. There you go. See? Kung Fu says, man, I love space travel. Yes, they're launching ISS. So happy to see an African leading such. Yeah, Elon Musk. Absolutely. He's an African. South Africa forgets that. They don't remember that he's a South African. But why is Elon Musk in America? Why isn't he doing after PayPal? Why didn't he do Why didn't he do SpaceX? Why didn't he do his Tesla factory? Why is that in South Africa? Because the South African government has made it impossible for entrepreneurs to succeed there. That's part of it. The other part of it, too, is that access to credit markets, capital, intellectual capacity from thousands of scientists and engineers. The epicenter of that, of course, is here in the United States, either Massachusetts, New York, California, New Jersey, places like that. So that's why. But he should be in Africa. He should have operations in Africa. Why isn't he building one of his battery plants in South Africa? Because the ANC makes it difficult to do business there. Sean meant that the Federal Reserve Act that he signed, and it was the $100,000 bill. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Okay, gotcha. Doc Breaker says, China ambassador warned for potential severe economic consequences if Australia doesn't back down from launching a COVID-19 inquiry. Well, there you go. Far be it from me to say that China behaves well in its international relations. Sorry, Starbucks break. Yeah, so famously, a few years back, China was angry at Japan for its role in the dispute over these small islands in the Sea of Japan, or China Sea, whichever you want to call it, the Sea of Japan, just off the coast of Japan, which China lays sovereign claims over. Japan also lays claims over it. Chinese ship ran into a Japanese ship out there. Tensions escalated. And as a consequence of the Japanese not backing off of their claims for the islands and protecting them with their maritime forces, China decided to get even. At this stage, at this point, China had bought up all of the rare earth element mines around the planet. Almost every single one of them were in operation, and they controlled 99% of rare earth mineral development, and they were stockpiling it in China. So in Japan, Toyota and others used rare earth elements to make the batteries for their battery powered cars, like the what's the small one there, the first one, I can't think of right now, drawing a blank on it. But they were using it for their battery operated cars or their hybrids. So what happened is that China put a moratorium on selling rare earth elements to Japan. And Japan took a hit. For 6 months, as their engineers scrambled to find alternate materials they could make the batteries out of effectively and efficiently, their economy was in a bit of trouble because Chinese used economic sabotage and economic force to get the Japanese to change the political position. And so what happened is that in the end, the Chinese really screwed themselves because what they did is necessity is the mother of invention. And when you deny a strategic material to a trading partner, if it's technologically possible, they're going to find an alternative, particularly a country that's advanced and is clever and has such talented engineers and scientists as Japan. And they did. So they came up with other elements that they could use to make the batteries, and they resumed battery production. And now Japan doesn't buy those rare earths from China anymore. And so China can't sell them to them. So they failed to get Japan to change its political position, much like sanctions do in many other places, and they failed. They've lost a market now, which is unfortunate for the Chinese, but that was stupid on their part. So yeah, the Chinese are threatening Australia. I'm not surprised. They'll threaten America. They already threatened us. They threatened us with a subterfuge campaign, claiming that the U.S. Army had created Wuhan coronavirus, and we put it in Wuhan during an exercise. Well, we don't do military exercises in China. The last time we had military forces in China in any significant level was during the Second World War, when we sent the American volunteers over there with the Claire Chennault and the Flying Tigers to defend China and support Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese nationalists, the Kuomintang, to defend China against the Japanese and against the communists as well. So we don't have forces in China. It just doesn't work. South Korea, yes. China, no. We didn't create this virus. Anyway, so they've already attacked us in that fashion, and they will no doubt threaten us. They've already threatened to withhold precursor materials from making medical, pharmaceutical products, and they also threatened not to send certain pharmaceuticals to America. What the Chinese are doing is screwing up. By making these threats, they're simply encouraging people to resort to producing these things on their own. We don't need China. This was a business decision and not a very wise one in my book to rely so heavily on China. China, despite what everyone says, is not going to come out of this stronger and better than they were before. They're going to suffer in many respects, and that's my view. All right, so see what else here. They're threatening Australia. We'll see what the Australians do. There's a lot of Chinese in Australia now, and we'll see how they react. Delays in closure of air travel in the USA cause the high numbers. Tourists, yes, I agree, absolutely. And the delays were not shutting down all international travel. So I was supposed to go to Vancouver for the Vancouver Sevens, the HSBC Sevens, and I would have taken this with me among my other jerseys. But I was supposed to, because I'm a Springboks fan and a Blitzboks fan, I was supposed to go there. I already paid for the tickets. I had hotels. I even bought tickets to 2 hockey games. But I had a previous commitment with the U.S. Army. Even though I'm retired now, I promised to do an event for them. And originally I thought I only had to be there on Tuesday through Thursday or Friday. Well, they came back to me late in the game and said, no, we need you there on the Monday. And we certainly need you there on the Sunday too. So I had to change my plans. I ate the cost of the tickets for the hockey games and also for the rugby, and I missed the tournament. But at the time, I was questioning, should I even go? We're in the midst of this COVID-19, and we've already stopped travel from China, and lots of Chinese go to Vancouver. In fact, so many Chinese live in Vancouver, as they call it. You had 2 generations of Chinese. You had the Hong Kong Chinese who came there to make sure they had Canadian citizenship and banking access so they could get out of Hong Kong if the Chinese cracked down. And now you have mainland Chinese who live in Hong Kong who are coming now. And if you go to Vancouver, you'll see a distinct breakdown between the original Chinese from Hong Kong and the Chinese from mainland Chinese who don't get along in many respects. And even though they're all ethnic Chinese, there's a divide there, greater divide than even you see in the Anglo community. So it's fascinating to see that. Now someone's calling my house again. I haven't had that phone ring in like 2 weeks, and today it's ringing for the second time now, probably being harassed here by nonsense. But yeah, so I was supposed to go to the Vancouver Sevens, and at the last minute had to cancel and didn't go. But even then, was questioning whether I should go because so many Chinese were coming into North America through Vancouver, and they'd simply drive across the border. Very frustrating. Very frustrating. Anyway, let's see what else. Uh, Seeing the USA has a federal system, why do some people blame Donald Trump for how the virus has spread? Beth, is it Simmons or Symes? Simmons, Beth, that's a good question, Beth. It has a lot to do with the political climate and with the media, from my perspective. So, yeah, why is Trump blamed for the virus? Well, Trump would be blamed for Eve eating the apple. Trump would be blamed for Moses having to flee from Egypt. Trump will be blamed for everything. Whether you like Donald Trump or you dislike him, he is the easy target for a lot of things. The reality is this, is that an awful lot of people in this country are comfortable with national control over many things, and they don't care or understand about how our system truly works. And so it has been habitual for people to turn to the federal government when they fail to plan for something. So, for instance, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is responsible for coordinating disaster response. But that has gone from a responsibility to coordinate disaster response to an expectation, particularly post-Katrina in the early 2000s. It's gone from an expectation to coordinate to be in control and to direct things at a national level. And that's not really what the intent of that organization was. By the same token, we have things like the Centers for Disease Control, but they don't run America's medical system. We don't have a medical system per se. We have a collection of medical facilities that are state, private, federal, that are for-profit, that are humanitarian or not-for-profit, like Lutheran hospitals, Catholic hospitals. We also have national government things like the Veterans Administration Hospital System, which is a national run thing for veterans. And then we have other facilities. So it's not a healthcare system. It is a number of systems and a disparate type of systems that come together. And people expect this all to be centrally controlled by the government. And it's not really set up that way. And so you see some states do well, some states not do well. It has everything to do with the way the federal system is set up. But Donald Trump, even if we had an authoritarian system, where if we had a parliamentary system, Donald Trump would still be the scapegoat for so many things. In part because he shoots his mouth off and says odd things that people latch onto. But it doesn't matter. The fact that he's white, that he's a man, that he's old, that he's got blonde or orange hair, whatever color his hair is, and blue eyes. All of those things are all the things that the politically correct crowd, the woke crowd, doesn't like, and that includes the media. So they'll attack him even if he came out tomorrow and saved the world by uttering two words. Imagine he got rid of COVID-19 and reset the world to where it was before this happened. He would be blamed for the 3 months of misery that the world has suffered, and it's unjust. I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but I judge the man based on his actions, not on his words. He's want to use a lot of hyperbole. That's just his nature. It's always been his nature. If you ever watched his ridiculous reality show, You're Fired or whatever it was, The Apprentice, that's how he was, all hyperbole, reducing everything to a few sentences. Anyway, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that many people in the electorate simply aren't well informed or educated, or they're not critically thinking. And that's distressing. If I can be a graduate of a public school system living in a chronically poor and underprivileged portion of the country in Appalachia, can become a critical thinker and evaluate people based on data and actions rather than emotion. We all make decisions on emotion. My point is that if I can do that as a public school graduate, then certainly most of the country can do it. But most of the country doesn't do it. They don't do it. It's very frustrating. Let's see. Let's have a look at everything. Let's have a look at everything in December to see if it was a good idea or not, but I think it's a cluster. If what's a good idea? The travel shutting down? I think the travel was probably a good idea on a short-term basis, but the fact that the rest of the world didn't shut down really made it a moot point for the United States. So, I mean, listen, I've been saying since we stopped all travel, China, but we haven't stopped all travel. Look at the skies. Look at the radar, folks. Look at all the people that are out there. We haven't stopped all travel. It's insane. There are still thousands and thousands of flights taking place every day. Transatlantic, transpacific, people moving around. It's limited, but there are still lots of travel going on. But even if we had successfully closed all of our borders and locked down all of our national flights and tightly controlled ships coming in and had measures to make sure that people weren't spreading it, it wouldn't have mattered. We have to have the entire world vanquish this virus. Otherwise, we open the borders up and it just comes right back in. And we can't trust China. The Chi-Coms in Beijing are not telling us the truth at all. about what the current scope of the problem is in China or what has happened in the past. So this is a real problem, and it is absolutely fascinating that people think that it's just going to be solved. Shutting the travel down certainly could have had an impact, and I think in the United States it's prevented it from being worse than it is. But I start to wonder. So yeah, let's look at December and see what the impact is. That's a good point. Um, it's first, it's virulent and still on the up. No flattening the curve. Yeah, but the flattening the curve was supposed to be about not overwhelming our hospitals. Well, we haven't overwhelmed our hospitals except in select places like New York City and Seattle and places like that. Most of the country, it's not affecting the hospitals anywhere near the degree they talked about. So that was what flattening the curve was. Then we could ease up. Well, we flattened the curve. We haven't eased up. So they keep changing. Then we keep moving the goalpost. It's like Charlie Brown, and there's Lucy, and there's Charlie Brown, and he comes up to kick the football, and she pulls it out from under him just as he kicks it, and he doesn't score. They keep moving the goalpost on us, and we have to go further down the field to get past this point, and you start to question the legitimacy of what governments are telling you. All right. That's a nuclear fuel. Oh, thorium, nuclear fuel. Yeah, I know thorium is nuclear fuel. Tercia says labor unrest in South Africa caused the lack of investment from international manufacturers. Well, that's part of it, but there's a lot of reasons why international investment, foreign direct investment, can be limited in South Africa at times. And amongst that are things like the fact that South Africa's labor force is very inefficient, very inefficient. Okay, so one of the reasons why there were so many textile jobs in South Africa was because of the multi-fiber agreement, which the World Trade Organization had allowed to continue until 2005. When that was suspended, people disappeared, and all the manufacturing for textiles went back to Asia, to Taiwan and China. I'm losing people. Is someone else on air, or am I getting boring? If I'm getting boring, let me know. I'll drop off too. But the textile jobs disappeared because South Africa's workforce is highly inefficient. You have to spend a lot of time and you have to hire a lot of people repeatedly to get the same level. The level of productivity in South Africa is abysmal compared to Europe, East Asia, or the United States and North America. And so that's one reason that foreign direct investment doesn't always go in. You have to spend a lot of time training and retraining people in South Africa, in part because of the education system, but also in part because of health. So when people are disappearing all the time to attend wedding or attend funerals for people who died from HIV, and you got 7.7 million people, the highest number of people infected on the planet in any one country, this impacts productivity, among other things. There's other reasons. So it's productivity. It's also the BE rules. It's also the labor unions. All of it plays a role. So, for instance, General Motors, when it went through its crisis a few years ago and the government stole the company from private investors and then it became Government Motors before they reissued stock and made a fortune off of it, General Motors had operations in South Africa and they decided to close their plants. Well, when they tried to close their plants, the unions came forward and said, no. Cosatu and others said, no, you can't close the plant. You must keep it open. Well, who is the union to tell a private company, that they have to keep a plant that's losing money open? They're losing money. It's not the plant's responsibility to provide for people into perpetuity. When you work for a company, you should be saving what you can and investing in. And if it's not enough pay, then you get some education and you get a better job somewhere else. It's not the job of General Motors to pay salaries to people who are producing things inefficiently. And so General Motors was going to sell that to, I think, Mitsubishi or somebody like that. And I'm not sure what happened with that factory, but it was comical to listen to the unions demand. So why would a company want to invest in a country like that where unions tell you can't even close your factory when you're losing money? It's stupid. Let's see what else. Tersa says, yes, we need to revamp labor laws. Yeah, it will do away with unions. Look, I'm anti-union. I actually was in the union. I was in the Teamsters. Yeah. So when I worked for United Parcel Service as a university student, my last year in college as an undergraduate, I got paid like $9 an hour in 1988, 89. That was a lot of money. And I worked for that money. I earned it. I was worth it. But it was good pay because it was negotiated by the union. Unions serve a role, but the historical propensity for corruption and for abuse and for misuse of unions doesn't help their reputation. So I'm not a fan of unions in certain circumstances, certainly not of Cosatu or of NUMSA and these other unions in South Africa, which are only concerned about their workers and not the bigger picture most of the time. There's a bigger picture than just the people working for the company. It's also the macro environment of the economy, suppliers, distributors, consumers, and then also those who invest in the company. All of that plays a role. So workers are only focused on their needs. They're very, very focused narrowly on their needs, and that's all they care about. And so we see unions in America, like the auto workers, United Auto Workers, will happily demand a contract for their workers that work in auto factories, which forces the companies to become more automated so they don't need as many workers and use robotics and assembly lines, stuff like that. And less people have jobs. Those who stay get better jobs and better benefits, but a lot of people don't have jobs as a consequence of the car manufacturer artificially moving into robotics and AI far sooner than they needed to be profitable. So unions, I'm not a big fan of them, but doing away with them. If people want to have a union, you have a right to form a union, but there should be constraints on unions. Tercia, Beth's sister said, yes, we need to revamp. Okay. Jessica says, call to vote for Biden. Biden? Telling a joke there? Rhymes with times. Symes rhymes with times. Thank you, Beth. Okay, I wasn't sure. You pronounce things phonetically, it would be Simes or something like that. But Symes. Sorry, Beth. So Beth Symes. Nicholas says, I've never believed the Chinese pandemic figures at all. No, you can't believe them at all. And they've even recently revised the Wuhan numbers. Look, 5 million people left Wuhan before there was ever a lockdown. And we don't have massive breakouts of this virus anywhere else in the country. Please. Fiction, pure fiction. This is going to be some fantastic novels that people write about what's happened here, and they'll be coming. Let's see. Lucy and this guy with diamonds. Beth says, I find you fascinating, not bored. Well, thank you, Beth. That's very kind of you. And thank all of you who are still here. I've got some viewers, still 14 viewers right now. I've dropped a few. I guess someone else came on air who's more interesting. But thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate folks joining me. It's been frustrating with my streams from a technological standpoint, and I'm an early adopter of technology, so I don't think it was operator timing and headspace. I think I've just been having problems. I rebrewed my router today, so maybe that's helped. But thank you all for tuning in. I'm glad that people find the discussion interesting. At some point, you have to wonder, I just lost somebody else. They went away. At some point, you have to wonder if this isn't just your own self-inflated ego sitting here talking to the screen. It's not. I can find better things to do with my time than sit around and talk to the screen, but I certainly enjoy the conversation with you all, the interaction, and a chance to discuss these topics that interest folks. So I'm glad that folks have tuned in. But thank you all for tuning in. I really enjoy it thus far, and we've got a good while here, and we've had people come and go, so that's interesting. But let me see what else. But now I have to leave. Oh, Beth is the one that left. She has to make dinner. Okay, so Beth found me fascinating, but Beth is the one that left. Okay, well, thank you for having been here, Beth Symes, which rhymes with times. Excellent. Oh, so I'm going to ask folks now. This was being left on for a debate that I was going to have with folks about human rights and counterterrorism. That's going to take place on May 4th with the Center for Strategic and International Studies based in DC. It's a think tank. Originally, it was supposed to be an in-person performance. I was flying to Minneapolis to participate in this debate, but now it will be an online debate. I let my beard grow because I wanted it for that debate to subvert expectations. So I'm going to start asking questions about, should the beard stay? Should the beard go? Do I look like some sort of religious prophet or a bushveld Boer farmer? Anyway, so I'm going to cut it off at some point, but a lot of people said they like it. Others said they hate it. So I have to let people know. Okay, let's see what else. You have to go to dinner. Yeah, I guess we're running at dinner time now for a lot of folks in South Africa. Do you know where Jimmy Hoffa is? No, I don't, Nicholas. But supposedly he's buried in New Jersey. We'll see one day. Justin goes, the phone calls are people call. Oh, my phone's ringing because they want me to vote for Joe Biden. Yeah, probably. Nicholas says, or under a football field. Yeah, I don't think he's under the football field. There's actually claims that someone actually, we'll probably find out where Jimmy Hoffa is in the next 10 or 15 years when one of the last people that's responsible for it dies and they can't be prosecuted. And they let the secret out. Tercia says, I cannot respect Trump. I have to say he behaves like Mumpera. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Certainly his conduct is bizarre and it's certainly questionable. Can't dispute that. Kung Fu says, thanks for the stream. Okay, Nicholas says, lots of concrete now. Tercia says, it's dinner time and I say now for a braai. Oh, I kill for a braai. It's supposed to be spring here. It's sunny today, but the weather has been bizarre and chilly here, so not really braai weather here. Doc Breaker says, thank you for the stream, Colonel. See you next time. With great beard comes great power. I lost Doc Breaker now, too. Keep it. You look great. Nicholas, General Custer. Yeah, General Custer. I have a beard, so I'm partial. Okay. And you can audition for the new Moses film. Yeah, I could be the next Charlton Heston. Yeah, there you go. Well, I'll tell you what, it has been fascinating, interesting so far, folks, and I'm really glad folks have tuned in. So this was today just the stream to recognize Freedom Day in South Africa, the 27th of April. here on the 26th anniversary of all-race democratic elections in South Africa. And it really was a South Africa-focused stream. So we've covered a lot of topics here. I hope that folks found them enjoyable and not necessarily controversial, and that it added something to your day. And I really appreciate those who joined, and it's good to see you to join in this conversation. I appreciate the input and the questions, and hopefully I've answered them in adequate fashion. As I said, I'll probably do a select, recorded video, which I do on my phone because the quality is really good on that. I'll do a video on Cyril Ramaphosa's address and the fact that he failed to mention. I'll make sure I listen to it again. I'm not mistaken that I didn't hear any white South Africans mentioned, but I'll listen to it again. And then I'll do one about what that says about reconciliation in South Africa. So that'll be coming up. Anyway, so Nicholas says it's been fantastic. Well, thank you, Nicholas. I've really enjoyed it too. Anyway, so I'll tell you what. So we're coming up on 2.5 hours. So I'm going to thank you all again, and then I'm going to do the closing stuff here as we wrap up here. And I want to thank you all for joining and joining in the conversation with me. It's been a lot of fun today. On today, the 27th of April, which is Freedom Day in South Africa, the 26th anniversary. Thanks to all the folks who joined the stream. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it. If you're not a subscriber and you find the content interesting, I ask that you reach right down there on the screen. You push that button and subscribe to my channel. And also be sure to push the little bell icon to the side of it to get personalized notifications so that in theory, YouTube will notify you whenever I do a live stream and or I do a video and post it online. So also, everyone enjoys getting a like on their video. I ask for likes, but the likes are not simply because of an ego. It's not that, but because the more likes you get compared to the number of viewers you get, the more likely it is that YouTube will promote your video so that others see it and get exposed to it. If you enjoy the content, please give me a like on this video, and also share it with your friends, share it with your foes. Discourse is the elixir of life. The more we talk about things in a cogent, calm, rational manner and discuss things and share ideas, the better the world is. And so I ask for you to share this with folks and get the word out there because the only way to get it out is for folks to share it. And so thank you all for your time. Let me see some of the closing comments here. Christoph says, no, you're right. I listened to the names in our president's speech. Well, yeah, no white South Africans. And that to me speaks volumes. And I'll address that in another video. So Tercia says, our young people give me hope. My son's best bud at varsity was black and female. He studied mechanical engineering. Well, that's fantastic, Tercia. Tercia, where do you live, if you don't mind sharing? I says, Tercia's gone. Goeienaand and muy blij. So Ice says, thanks, Chris. It was a great stream. Well, folks, thanks once again. Really appreciate it. I'm going to wrap up for this now. Thank you for tuning in. Feel free to watch all of my videos. The one on South African Airlines, the end of the road, is getting a lot of traction right now. Share that with folks. And in that, I talk about it. Also, if you want to go back and look a little bit earlier, back in February, I did a video on South African Airlines in which I said how to fix this mess. And the recommendations I made included divesting it from the state. But now that's going in liquidation, those recommendations could still be sound for a reformed or redeveloped or newly launched South African Airlines. The beard looks great. Need a trim? All right, folks, thank you very much for tuning in. This has been Chris on Indaba, Africa on Freedom Day in South Africa. Thank you for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you again on my videos. God bless you all. Hang in there. We're going to get through this COVID-19 thing one way or another. Hopefully, it'll be the best outcome for people. Take care, folks.